Welcome to Deanji Winji. In the fiery depths of hell, where darkness reigns and despair thrives, Alistair, the master torturer, took pleasure in the torment of countless souls. Yet one soul shone brighter than the rest, Dean Winchester's. This soul, resilient and defiant, whispered of a past intertwined with celestial power and a destiny waiting to unfold. Unbeknownst to all, the Archangel Michael found himself bound to the righteous man's soul, forced to witness the horrors of hell. As Dean faced unimaginable agony, flickers of Michael's memories ignited within him, revealing a history steeped in divine conflict and cosmic legacy. When the moment came for the first seal of Lucifer's cage to be shattered, Dean's choices would not only alter his own fate but also the very balance of heaven and hell. With Michael's essence guiding him, could Dean defy the odds and reshape the destinies of celestial beings and demons alike? Join us as we explore a world where the reincarnation of an archangel in the form of a human hunter could change everything. What will it mean for the war between good and evil? Let's dive into the possibilities of this thrilling crossover. Prologue. Alistair was creeped out. Hundreds, thousands, millions of souls passed through his hands from the moment he was reborn. Millions screamed in pain day after day under the master torturer's toys, writhed in absolute agony, begged him to stop, filling the confines of his being with that delightful, sweet feeling of ecstasy. Hundreds of thousands had the light of their souls burned away, were twisted and turned into demons, remodeled after Alistair's darkest imagination. Except for one soul who had not reacted to any of it. Maybe it was because it was the righteous man's soul, bright and pure, special in a way that whispered to his instincts and stirred the fear inside him that he didn't realize still existed till then. Alistair sneered, refusing to admit that a simple soul caused his hackles to rise. He dived into his work with extra determination and, for a while, nothing felt different. The soul sang under his masterful guidance like any other poor bastard on his rack, screamed and writhed, more cursed than begged, but the demon wasn't chagrined by it. He grinned like lunatic, riding high on the sheer euphoria, his mind always whirling with new and more thrilling methods to bring forth more pain, more agony, to send the human into infinite despair and inevitably force the tiny, beautiful word of submission. Alistair always did love the process of training of his pets the most. After 30 years, he finally heard it. Yes, a single word uttered by the righteous man resounded throughout the pit, echoes reaching its deepest layers and darkest corners. Demons rejoiced and angels began their siege on hell. One simple, yes, and the righteous man climbed from the rack, took the blade into his trembling hands and made the first slice. And when everything went wrong, as soon as the righteous man drew the first blood with the knife it was given, it stopped and just stared at its victim. And stared, not even Alistair was able to shake it from its trance. So he put the soul back on the rack. The first seal had been broken and no one cared what happened to the one who did it. Alistair was a stubborn demon. He wanted to break the righteous man. Wanted to witness the unhallowed murkiness finally breaching that bright core and filling it to the brim, stuffing it with demonic darkness until it came apart at its seams. Until it shattered and reassembled haphazardly, pieces gluing together in a vain attempt to recreate the form it had before, but only managing to put itself in a wrong way, being reborn anew as a full-fledged citizen of hell. But the righteous man just stared at his tormentors without saying a word, without screaming, pleading, begging. Nothing. Alistair felt frustrated, annoyed, and after several years, he felt furious. It was maddening, an endless staring, a pitying gaze got under the demon's skin and stayed there. An annoying itch he couldn't scratch and which nourished the spark of fear that festered deep inside his evil essence like an infected wound. Slowly, it started to drive Alistair insane. After a decade, the angelic garrison drew uncomfortably close. Alistair knew that it was a matter of days, maybe even hours, till the last line of demonic defense crumbled and those shiny birds would swarm his lovely chambers. He needed to leave, but he couldn't quite force himself to flee. Alistair felt ashamed. How could he call himself master torturer, if he was unable to make the soul scream? When the scorching glow of the angel's true form illuminated the torture chamber, the righteous man smiled. Even with its jaw ripped away, its lips cut off, eyes carved out, Alistair could swear he saw the smug smirk appear on the soul's face. Master torturer could only gawk at his victim helplessly. He fled when the intensity of the impending angel's grace started to burn his essence with great precision. Alistair might have been able to survive the smiting from the young seraph, but he was not taking any chances. Trying to stop the angel from taking the soul, no matter how infuriating, was definitely not in the master plan, after all. The celestial being descended upon the torture chamber, his purifying brilliance banishing the darkness and melting the vial of hell all around him, making it impossible for demonic spawns to enter this place for at least a couple of centuries. The rack incinerated, freeing the damaged and tortured soul. The righteous man instantly reached for the intimately familiar safety of the angel's grace, no hesitation in its shaky motion. The comforting warmth embraced it, cradling it close. One after another, healing waves washed over it, mending wounds and soothing the scars. And suddenly, the soul began to remember. First, Sam, its younger brother, in his tears as he was forced to watch his brother being shredded into pieces by hellhounds, the last fragment of the innocence crumbling into dust. Then, John, its dad, and the emptiness and anger and the sense of failure he left behind after selling his soul to the demon. Bobby, Ellen, Joe, and all the others, even its beloved baby. Finally, its mother's smile, when its pudgy fingers tugged on her blonde strands, her sweet smell when she leaned closer to plant a loving kiss on its forehead before tucking it into bed and whispering the words, "Angels are watching over you," like they were a secret. The soul remembered. He was Dean Winchester, a human, a hunter, a friend, a son, a brother. The seraph ascended the lower layers of hell with his precious cargo carried and protected within him. His grace slid over the soul, caressing it carefully and attentively, cleansing its essence from any corruption which managed to wiggle in between the cracks from the endless torture. And the soul started to remember the lives beyond just Dean Winchester's. His first life as a mortal, born to two humans who couldn't conceive a child. They always called him their little miracle until they stopped when he started to hear things others couldn't, see things that weren't there, and do things no other humans could. After his first death, he got reborn. And then again, and again, going on the continuous reincarnation cycle through more than 100 of mortal lives. Each chipped off leftover bits of his original essence, reshaping and smoothing out his existence into something different. Something peculiar. Something very special, into his own soul. In the end, he remembered his initial creation, emerging out of nothingness and opening his eyes for the first time to see his father smiling down at him, to feel him gently caressing his wings, emotions trickling through his fingertips straight into his grace, excitement and pride and absolute, unconditional love. He remembered sharing the same emotions as he witnessed the creation of the other being like him, how eager he was to teach and guide, to love his first brother as deep as their father loved them. He remembered two other Rothers coming into existence, the nothingness molded into the universe by his father's hands, the great beasts and their inevitable banishment, and the war against the darkness that soon followed. He remembered the creation of the heaven, the creation of all the rest of his younger siblings, one after another, and then the garden, the earth, and humans. He remembered his beloved younger brother pleading with him for help and being refused, then the rebellion shaking heaven to its core. He remembered casting him from heaven at the order of his father. He remembered the first sin, the rise of the first demon and all the demons after it. He remembered Father's order to lock his rebellious son away in the deepest abyss of newly created hell. He remembered the emptiness and void growing inside him after following that order, experiencing pain and guilt for the first time in his existence. He remembered the disappearance of his other little brother, the growing resentment of another, and his self-imposed exile into his personal corner of heaven. He remembered Father's disappointment, his departure, and his last words for him. He remembered ripping his own grace out. He had a plan then. Apparently, something went wrong. Very, very wrong. The Archangel Michael hadn't planned to stay human for so long, and he definitely, hadn't expected to reincarnate as Dean Winchester, the human who broke the first seal of Lucifer's cage and who by his father's will was supposed to become his true vessel. As his purified soul was carefully nestled into his restored body and he breathed a ragged breath for the first time in a very long time, Michael couldn't help a small chuckle that slipped through his cracked lips. The irony of this unexpected predicament wasn't lost on him. But maybe it was for the better. With the attitude Dean Winchester had, he would have never said, yes anyway. Dean Winchester is saved. Dean coughed as stale and stuffy air filled his newly restored lungs. It was too dark to see anything, so he tried to orient himself by feeling his surroundings with his hands. Rotting wood, he realized after some wiggling. He was lying in the box of rotting wood. A coffin. The angel dumped his ass into a coffin. You son of a bitch, Dean croaked as he rummaged around his pockets for something useful. Saved, my ass, he resumed grumbling until a crooked smirk slipped on his lips when he found his old trusty lighter. Dean looked around the tight space once again, a lit lighter grasped in his hand this time. The longer he stayed here, the more his head hurt. And it wasn't just because due to lack of oxygen or too much dust clogging his respiratory system. The entirety of different memories convoluted into a massive, jumbled mess, dozens of his previous reincarnations lapped over each other, intertwining and mixing with eons of Michael's angelic recollections. The cheering voices of all his younger siblings in the corner of his mind were definitely not helping either. But Dean had no time to fix it right now. He really needed to get topside before the air ran out and his body died again. That would be kinda awkward. Dean pried the rotting wood board of his coffin lid, quickly covering his head from the sudden gush of dirt. Zombies had it tough. He swore to never make fun of them ever again and was just grateful for small mercies. The ground seemed to have been softened by the brief touch of an angel's true form. While the whole ordeal of crawling out of one's own grave was not an easy task, it still was easier than Dean anticipated. When he finally reached the top, his lungs screamed, his arms ached, and he felt like a supernova just went out in his head. After a deep breath of fresh air, Dean pushed his tired body farther from the hole. Once he finally reached the refuge of tall, dry grass, he let himself collapse into a boneless heap. For some time, he just laid there, panting and exhausted, shielding his eyes from the too bright sunlight, but content to be warmed by gentle rays. The grass moved in steady waves, rustling and murmuring, dancing in the wind. Gradually, the song of crickets and the chirps of birds came back and lifted the blanket of the unnatural, eerie silence from the surrounding forest. Dean let his mind wander, basking in the splendor of his father's creation, the sky above and the soil beneath, encompassing nature, rich with flora and various animals, including his greatest masterpiece, humans. So, why the heck he made plans to destroy it all? With a sigh, Dean hauled himself up to his feet, casting a quick glance to his surroundings for the first time. The trees in the immediate vicinity were torn out at their roots and flattened in a circle, his grave acting as its epicenter. Some were broken in half, branches ripped clean off their stems. Dean took in the destruction of the forest, amusement flickering across his features. His little siblings' landing really did a number on this place. It would certainly leave humans baffled once they would stumble upon it. Wandering out of the ravaged area and into an overgrown road, Dean began to stroll alongside it while using free time to thoroughly sort through his memories. He carefully sifted out his previous human reincarnations and shoved them out of the way, burying it deep inside his consciousness. That left him with only 2 sets of memories and consequently 2 different identities, Dean Winchester and the Archangel Michael. It sure came as a surprise when the human side took a priority almost instantly. An urgent wish, no, need, to make sure Sam was okay flared inside him, spreading throughout his whole being like a wildfire. Absent-mindedly, Dean rubbed his chest, massaged his ribs gently at first and then pressed harder when it didn't help to alleviate the dull ache he felt there, a yawning hole, raw and empty. As if his innards were minced into a fine paste and sucked out by the tiny black hole that suddenly opened up inside his thorax. As if a piece of him was somehow missing. And it was. Michael's grace was missing. His grace. He couldn't quite smother a small shudder at the memory of the sheer agony he went through as he tore his grace out. Those centuries without it felt surprisingly long now, even for his Archangel's side. Clicking his tongue in a fit of abrupt irritation, Dean pried his hand away from his chest. Besides finding Sam and his grace, he had no idea what to do next. Looking from heaven's position, God's plan was rather simple. Let Lucifer out, let him and Michael take their true vessels and have them fight till one of them won, with heaven and hell on the sidelines cheering for the horse they had respectively bet on. It seemed that humanity had only one role in God's plan, be collateral damage. Looking from its perspective, from Dean Winchester's position, this plan was the biggest bullshit Dean had ever heard. And he had heard lots of bullshit throughout his life. Dean heaved a relieved sigh, as he finally spotted a sign of civilization, the lonely gas station. He really didn't want to think about what to do with the apocalypse before getting a good cup of water. The gas station didn't look completely abandoned. It was stocked with fresh food and water and even had a stack of newspapers which Dean assumed were pretty recent. A sheer miracle, considering that the place was in the middle of nowhere without a single ghost in sight for miles, let alone a living person. He wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth though. Dean went to the bathroom to wash his face and for some time simply stared at his own reflection in the dirty mirror. His vessel had been perfectly restored, without a single hair out of line. Even old badly healed broken bones and scars were now gone. He got a new one, however, a red, angry handprint-shaped scar on his shoulder, a physical manifestation of the sacred imprint left directly on the surface of his soul, an aftereffect of being touched by a celestial being while in hell, a protection brand of sorts. And that was when Dean realized the fact nagging him at the back of his mind from the moment he woke up. He possessed his own soul now. A real human soul. Which was impossible, because fallen angels didn't have souls, only mere threads of their grace keeping their original consciousness tied to a vessel. No matter if it was falling by ripping it out and being reborn into a human's body or by breaking their connection to heaven and letting their grace slowly seep out and scatter across the cosmos. Each soul was unique, special. They didn't appear out of nowhere, but were carefully shaped and molded by the universe itself, by the laws of creation. God himself made it possible, constructing the self-contained system that assured humanity's survival. The same laws seemingly used a leftover trace of Michael's grace to forge him a soul as he kept going through the continuous cycle of reincarnation. Dean shut that too overwhelming to comprehend line of thought off in an instant. Finally, the dirt was washed from his face, his body relaxed after drinking a whole bottle of water and munching on some granola bars. With the immediate needs taken care of, Dean's mind strayed to what to do next. Whatever he decided to do, the first step was finding Sam. Even before regaining his grace, Dean rubbed at the spot of his chest where the emptiness felt the most prominent. Sam Winchester was the key person for whatever side Michael would decide to take in the upcoming apocalypse, so, of course, he needed to find the kid first and foremost. Such reasoning appeased his Archangel's side, barely, so with a rough plan in mind, Dean grabbed some more snacks and water and emptied the register, ready for the road. He stiffened when the ethereal presence suddenly loomed over the small building. It was soft and gentle, but at the same time felt huge and immense, calm but mighty, and it was coming down fast. Dean Winchester. The high-pitched whining sound pierced Dean's ears like a knife. He pressed his hands on his ears, gritting his teeth as the unbearable pain bore into his skull. "We need to talk." The windows exploded, raining down on his hunched figure. The sound ceased as abruptly as it started. After another moment, Dean dared to lift his head to survey the small shop. The pain surged through his head and with a groan he tried to soothe it by making soothing circles on his temples with his fingers. Didn't help much. Brushing across his ears, he felt something wet and sticky. Blood on his hands earned a displeased scowl. "Lower the volume if you want to talk, buddy," Dean muttered under his breath as he collected his stolen goods and went outside to make a call. Sam's mobile phone was turned off. Calling Bobby ended up pretty much as he had expected. While staring at the old car in the parking lot, Dean realized that he truly missed his baby. But more than anything he missed his wings. The void in his ribcage twinged almost unbearably at the last thought, but Dean ignored it with a stubborn fervor, choosing instead to hotwire the battered scrap in front of him and get himself back on track. The houses of Pontiac City's suburbs were just starting to peek out over the horizon when Dean felt it, a pull towards the city. It wasn't a soft tug, but a full-on wrench, almost excruciating yank on his very existence. A piece of Michael's grace was here, in this city. He almost smashed the car into a streetlight. Dean shouldn't really have been this surprised. It was expected that his grace would find a way to gravitate back to its owner. He made absolute sure of that before dismantling it into pieces and letting several of them fall together with him to earth. Dean started shaking, barely able to keep his hands safe on the steering wheel. Few minutes to remind himself how to breathe and his shock fanned out into gleeful excitement. His foot pressed on the gas pedal as far as it went, causing the old scrap's tires to screech miserably against the surface of the road as it jerked forward in a sudden gain of momentum. Every fiber of Dean's being was vibrating with anticipation as he maneuvered across the city towards where his grace was calling to him. Adrenaline coursed through his veins and a wide grin grew of its own accord as he followed the feeling of his essence to the hotel by the name, Astoria. Dean almost ran into the streetlight, again, when his eyes fell on one particular car, sitting peacefully in the corner of the hotel's parking lot. The Impala, his baby. She was gorgeous, downright majestic in all of her sleek, black beauty. Hands trembling in reverence, Dean touched the trunk of the Impala and carefully stroked over the whole length of the car, his vast longing and love in the motion. This was home, not heaven, not something else. The Impala. His Archangel's status couldn't change that. The baby always was and would continue to be Dean's home. Then the realization hit him with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer: if baby was here, then Sammy was here too. Dean turned around and looked at the building. Sam and the piece of Michael's grace in one place. One hell of a coincidence. Maybe it was a trap. As soon as that idea popped in, Dean pushed it aside with a snort. Angels were only mere stories for the hunters at this point in time, chubby naked babies with halos and tiny wings. Sam wasn't an exception. He still decided to approach the room with caution. He stood in front of the door for a couple of minutes just gathering his courage to knock. Not that Dean was afraid of being killed. He wasn't certain what he would feel seeing Sam now that he had his memories back, and the uncertainty of his own reaction scared him more than anything. Dean sighed in helpless frustration as he peeled his hand from his chest where it rubbed his skin raw, cleared his throat, and finally lightly rapped on the door. A muted thump and a curse later, it swung open, revealing a disheveled Sam. Ruby, whatever he wanted to say instantly died at the back of his throat. Every muscle of his body just froze, face washed blank with confusion, like his brain cogs couldn't turn fast enough to take in the information his eyes projected into them. Dean stared back, drowning in a violent ocean of his own emotions. Despite that, the corner of his mouth slowly rose up and fondness curled around his eyes. "Hiya, Sammy," he greeted softly. Sam blinked twice, confused and disbelieving, and then blinked some more, trying to make sense of his life right now. On the next blink, his expression crumbled like a house of cards, immeasurable pain and grief etched profoundly across his young features. Dean's heart skipped a beat in anguish at the sight. But then, all cues of vulnerability melted from Sam's face, thoroughly wiped clean, replaced by the all-consuming rage instead. He charged Dean with a frenzied roar. The latter instinctively caught his arm holding a silver knife that came seemingly out of nowhere, and twisted Sam around, restraining it behind his back. "Easy, Tiger," Dean said, his voice light and amused. He snatched the blade, shoved his brother into the room, shot a quick glance to the corridor to make sure no one witnessed their momentary skirmish, and closed the door before Sam managed to catch himself after his stumble. They both turned to face each other at the same time. Sam's body was coiled like a spring, poised to defend, obviously expecting Dean to attack now. When it didn't happen in an immediate instant, he warily eyed the stolen knife before his clearly calculating gaze flicked to the bed. "Don't even think about it, Sammy," Dean said, taking a step closer to draw Sam's entire attention back on him and not what he assumed was a handgun, stashed somewhere on the bed. "You wouldn't want to hurt your own brother now, would you?" Sam's jaw tightened in that familiar, stubborn, ready-to-fight way. "Only Dean can call me that," he warned the other man, hissed at him. What are you?" "It's me, Sammy," Dean assured, quickly brushing the silver blade over his forearm, drawing blood. "Not a shapeshifter or revenant." He pulled his t-shirt's collar, revealing an undamaged anti-possession tattoo. "Not a demon, either. Just me, your brother." Sam observed him in silence, and Dean was content to let his brother puzzle him out. No matter how hard the kid seemed to try and keep his expression neutral, a sliver of hope finally shone through. "Dean," his voice was so small, unsure, it was clear that he was grasping at straws. "But, you're dead," was left unsaid, hanging awkwardly in the air between them. "No buts. I look fantastic, I know. You though," Dean pointed at Sam and smirked. "You need a haircut, kiddo." Sam let a rush of air pass his lips which sounded suspiciously like a burst of choked laughter, something between annoyance and amusement. Then he flung himself forward and crushed his brother against his chest. He buried his face into the crook of Dean's neck, racked with the force of unvoiced cries and fearing to ease his desperate grip even a tiny bit, lest his older brother would somehow leave or disappear into thin air. Dean returned the hug with equal strength. He loved this kid, he realized with startling clarity. He loved him in a way father had always wanted him to love humans. More than him, more than anyone else in the universe. His home now felt perfect. Complete. It was just that simple. Surprisingly so. For a while, two brothers stood there, relishing in each other's presence. Dean was the first one to clap Sam over the shoulder at the same time as he wheezed out, "I need to breathe here, man." "Oh." In a reluctant hurry, Sam pulled away. "Sorry." He kept one hand on Dean's shoulder and stared at him, his gaze full of genuine joy and sort of childish awe, the sort children gain while watching the hero they greatly admire. Dean hadn't seen such look on his baby brother's face pointed at him since the latter hit puberty. It brought a new wave of warmth, filling every crevice and fold and space inside his being. Even the hollow under his ribcage where his grace was ripped out didn't seem that painful at this very moment. "But, Dean? How are you?" Sam waved vaguely up and down the older man's body, searching for correct wording to ask what was on his mind. "Here. Alive. Someone pulled me out," Dean explained with an unconcerned shrug. "Don't know who or why. I woke up in the pine box this morning and had to crawl up topside. Was passing Pontiac on my way to Bobby when I noticed my baby in the parking lot." He flashed an easy grin. A beauty after my own heart, it's not like I could have missed it. Of course, Sam huffed with an eye roll, full 6 feet of fond exasperation. Oh, by the way, he said, fumbling with the cord around his neck before pulling a small bronze amulet over his head. You probably want this back, too. Dean's smile threatened to split his face in two as he took the amulet into his own hands. He could sense a piece of Michael's grace impatiently humming against his skin, eager to be released and reunited with its Archangel. Kind of ironic, he mused, the fact that an old trinket wasn't the only thing Sam gave him back. Before the warm golden light could slip out and illuminate the dim room, alerting his brother, Dean tightly squeezed the amulet in his fist and whispered, "Thanks." "Don't mention it." Sam smiled too, but it was short-lived. After a moment, his brow furrowed. Something wrong. Dean's head snapped up and he blinked at the obvious worry on his brother's features that wasn't there before. "What do you mean? You keep rubbing the same spot over and over." Sam gave a small wave at Dean's chest with his hand. "Are you hurt?" Dean glanced down, then pursed his lips and forced his arm down with an irritated grunt. He didn't even notice doing it. Not that it was of any use either. "Nah, I'm fine," he replied. "A bit out of tune with my own meat suit, that's all. Hadn't been in there for quite some time, you know. That reminds me." A sheepish smile broke across his face and he promptly moved towards the bathroom. I need to pee now." "Dude," Sam bristled, at a loss for words. "Seriously? What? You gotta do what you gotta do." Dean stopped before closing the door, the hand with the amulet safely hidden behind it, and turned to Sam. "I haven't peed in like," he did some calculations in his head and scowled at the result. "Longer than I'd be comfortable to admit out loud." The younger man shook his head, unable to stop his mouth stretching into a grin. "Take a shower, too. You need it," he shouted as the bathroom's door closed behind his brother. There was a rustle, soon followed by, "Bitch." Sam's smile grew bigger. "Jerk. Take a shower, too. You need it." Dean dropped a towel onto the floor as he exclaimed, "Bitch," and stuffed it into the gap under the door. Sam's usual, "Jerk," came a second later. Dean's heart swelled and he broke into a bright grin. He really loved that kid. The affirmation of his emotions brought forth a wave of relief. With his two identities still acting as independent personalities, not completely coalesced into one yet, he was worried of his own reaction to Sam Winchester. But it seemed that his Archangel's side approved of his youngest sibling. Responding to its owner's sudden fierce desire to protect and cherish, the grace inside the amulet pulsed eagerly, intimately familiar warmth trickling through Dean's fingertips into his nerves and bloodstream, but too weak to reach the yawning hole in the center of his thorax. Dean stared at the amulet, savoring the golden glow that seeped through the physical confines, and wondered how his angelic grace would react to his human soul. Not like the experience of his eons-old existence helped here. As far as Michelle knew, he was the only angel bestowed with this great gift. He might as well spontaneously combust once his grace and soul came into contact, eradicating only his vessel at best and burning a hole in a space-time continuum at worst. Dean grimaced at the last thought. His father made plans to destroy the world, but it was doubtful that he was up to the task patching the entire universe after that kind of massive fuck-up, so maybe the worst wouldn't happen. Hopefully. In some chance it did happen, however, Dean was not getting erased without taking one last shower. His smile returned at the prospect. Pushing the amulet over his head to hang around his neck, he quickly shed his clothes and jumped into the shower to have his fair share of a nice bath after spending 40 years in damnation. Once all the caked-on dirt and grime was scrubbed off his skin, Dean felt no rush to leave just yet. He sat down on the tile floor cross-legged under the stream of warm water and grasped the amulet. Readying himself for whatever consequences his actions would bring, he inhaled deeply, exhaled, and slowly uncurled his fingers, coaxing his grace out as he did. Divine aureate light illuminated the bathroom as the sliver of the Archangel Michael's essence surged out of the amulet, swirled in the air, and then rushed towards Dean. He closed his eyes, welcoming it in. No matter how small, it still was the piece of the first Archangel's grace, the strongest beings in existence after the three primordial entities, the embodiment of Michael's power in its rawest form. Dean expected the suffering, but the rapidly spreading pain still choked the breath from his lungs. It burned, boiled his flesh and bones with absolute brutality. The scorching pain seared through every single vein and capillary as though his blood had become acid, the pure intent of destroying him from the inside out. Without meaning to, Dean curled into himself and clenched his teeth with the strength that threatened to shatter them, preventing screams from tearing out of his throat. Rancid heat and putrid smells and sheer agony singed into his mind, bled terrifying silhouettes into his eyelids, and Dean was in hell. He was still in hell, or maybe back in hell, perhaps he had never left. Abruptly, the torture ended. The overwhelming pain ebbed away into a sort of sharp throbbing until it ceased completely when Michael's grace slid to its proper place in the middle of the aching emptiness, settling beside Dean's human soul, slotted so perfectly and tingly in the space next to it as if specifically created for this exact purpose. No awkward feeling, no abrupt explosion. It felt remarkably good, right in a way that was as mind-boggling as it was awe-inspiring. Dean let out a long, slow, slightly ragged breath, allowing the feeling of pain to wither away with the last drop of air from his lungs. He pried his hands from his thighs, flexing numb fingers, and tilted his head up. Already cold water continued to beat down on him, soothing and comforting his too hot, too tight skin. Something pulled at Dean's newly restored angelic senses, though nothing but a puny shadow of his true abilities, and he shifted his focus, keeping his eyes tightly shut. Souls, he realized, those brilliant sparks of Father's creation. He was sure he couldn't see them, not yet, but his improved perception could now pick up on their presences in the immediate vicinity around him. Dean zoomed on the soul in the room behind the wall. Sam, he felt it at once. Wrongness that radiated from the kid's soul. Then, wounds, just small burns, but unbelievably numerous, laced across the entirety of its surface. Still fresh, still sizzling where the unhallowed darkness clung, slowly eating its way into deeper layers towards the core. There was someone else at Sam's side too. Repulsive and disgusting, all jagged edges and twisted fragments of what was once a human being. Obviously a demon, most likely Ruby. Dean's eyes snapped open, glowing specks of molten gold fading from his green irises. The lights in the bathroom flickered, just a buzz and a dimming before they came back. A wicked smirk pulled at the corner of the fallen Archangel's lips. He didn't possess enough juice to smite the sly skunk at this moment, but he sure had plenty to scare her shitless. Bitch. Sam's smile grew bigger. Jerk. He stood there for a while, listening to the muted sound of the shower starting up. Dean was back. His big brother was back in here. Here and not in hell. Sam ran his hands down his face and through his hair, unable to wipe off the silly grin that threatened to split his face in two. This knowledge was the most liberating feeling the young hunter had felt in years. Two brothers always were able to go against all odds together, despite how grim or dark circumstances appeared. And now Dean was back, alive and well. After a bit, Sam pushed himself to move and sit on the couch, the exit of the room and the door to the bathroom in his sight. A few minutes later, he stood up, rechecked the salt lines on the windowsills, nothing out of ordinary, and sat down again. With feet bouncing up and down, Sam fidgeted for a couple more moments, then jumped to his feet and made his way towards the small hotel refrigerator and pulled out 2 bottles of special hunter beer mixed with holy water. Just a precaution, a routine check, and a way to silence some stupid voice that kept whispering at the back of Sam's mind about something amiss, about how Dean felt off. Of course, his brother was a bit off. He came back from the dead, where he spent 4 long months in the very depths of hell, suffering alone through pain and torture and hellfire. No person could come out of such an ordeal unscathed. Sam truly believed that Dean was who he said he was. He had faith in his older brother, even if his faith in God and his angels had been lost a long time ago. The young man jumped slightly in surprise when the room door opened and a petite brunette slipped in, smirking coyly at him. "Hey, Sam," she greeted cheerfully, throwing her arms around him. "Missed me?" Sam put his hands on her shoulders and pushed her away, not unkindly but at the same time lacking the previous needy touch to it. "You shouldn't be here, Ruby," he said, careful to keep his voice low. He glanced at the bathroom. The shower was still going. "You should go." The demon scowled at him, clearly upset by his unexpected rejection. "Giving me a cold shoulder again, Sam?" she asked bitterly. "I thought we're past it." "Look, it's not." "No, you look," Ruby interrupted, shoving a finger to his chest and successfully shutting Sam up. A soft smile curled on her lips as she grasped the hunter's chin between her fingers and forced him to look at her. "I know it's hard for you, baby. I've been with you after Dean died, remember?" she murmured, pressing her body closer, her warm breath ghosting the tender spot where his jaw met his neck. "You came so far now. You have to do it, Sam. Lilith must die at any cost. Did you forget what she did to your brother?" The lights in the room blinked rapidly several times, dimming momentarily and coming back with a distinct electrical hum. "Stop that," Sam hissed, lips thinning out into a tight line as he pushed the demon away once again. The latter opened her mouth to protest that the lights weren't her doing, but Sam was having none of it. This isn't about Lilith, okay? You should go. I'll call you later and explain. Ruby stared at him, a shimmer of anger and disappointment displayed openly in her expression. Fine, she finally yelled, throwing her arms up in a sign of surrender. Fine, as you wish, Sam, she said curtly. Call me once you're done with this little drama of yours and finally ready to. Hello, Ruby. She froze. Every cell in her vessel came to a grinding halt, every senses and mental alarms instantly going haywire. Ruby spun on her heel, fully prepared to lash out, because whoever, whatever stood behind her posed an extreme threat to her prolonged survival. Dean. The older Winchester leaned against the doorframe of the bathroom, arms crossed, wearing only his pants, water droplets running in small rivulets down his bare chest. Green eyes pinned the demon in place with cold efficiency, and his smirk was neither friendly nor particularly reassuring. There was something innately unsettling in Dean's gaze, something that put the hair on the back of Ruby's neck up. A tacit promise of her inevitable destruction. A strangely shaped scar on his shoulder caught her attention, and her hackles instinctively rose at the sight of it and the purifying energy that still lingered there. Even Dean's soul felt so sickening clean and pure, her guts churned. Ruby tried to force a smile back on, to show how friendly and eager to help she was, but all she could muster was a grimace. It's good to see you again, Dean. Dean cocked one eyebrow up. Really? He asked, his grin stretching a tad bit wider. Like that of a big cat's, able to pounce but too lazy to do so. Can't say I return the sentiment. That's all right, Ruby stammered out, expression scrunched up in her great attempt to keep her aversion in check. I don't expect you to. Dean sized her up, dark amusement upon his features. It made the demon squirm under his intense scrutiny. Good that we're on the same page, the man said in the same light tone that screamed danger to Ruby's primal survival instincts. But this ain't Roach Motel, so, how about you scurry out of here? Definitely not a question, even if structured like one. An order or a threat. And out of Sam's life while at it. Ruby couldn't help a small sneer slipping through her meticulously constructed mask. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Dean was supposed to rot in hell, slowly break, came apart and become only a shell of the person he once was. That was what hell did to the human souls. And yet, after spending 40 years downstairs, Dean stood tall, stronger and more confident than ever before, watching her like a bird of prey. No doubt, no wavering, not a drop of self-loathing in those steely green eyes. As if sensing the demon's growing fear, Dean let out a huff that sounded suspiciously like a brief chuckle. When Ruby snarled at his open mockery, it jerked Sam out of shock seeing the hand-shaped scar on his brother. He made a step in front of the demon, hands rising in a placating manner. Dean, calm down, he trailed off, realizing how stupid it sounded. Dean was calm, uncharacteristically so, a perfect picture of calmness. Look, Dean, just hold on, okay? Let me explain this. Ruby is here to help me, help us. We're trying to find Lilith and kill her. We don't need her. Sam's temper flared like a live volcano, but he swiftly stomped on it and took control, smoothing over the edges that bristled into the existence after Dean's careless dismissal. Blowing up wouldn't help in this situation. His brother didn't know how much Ruby had helped him, from what kind of dark, hopeless pit she had dragged him out, even if there was a time when he didn't want to be saved at all. Dean knew nothing of it. And it was better that way. Sam turned to Ruby. It's better if you go now, Ruby. The brunette frowned, not daring to lower her gaze from the older Winchester. Yeah, it sure looks like. Her eyes suddenly widened and he took a step back out of reflex. She could swear she saw, no, she thought she saw Dean's eyes flashing gold when he tilted his head slightly to the side. But that was absurd. He was just a human. Room's lighting played tricks on her, Ruby assured herself. I should go. Oh, don't let me keep you, Dean chimed in with the same predatory grin on full display as he performed a dismissive shooing gesture. He made no move to vacate the spot in the bathroom's doorway. Ruby shuffled carefully towards the exit, taking as wide berth around the older hunter as possible. Don't come again. There. The previous promise of her inevitable destruction rang strongly in Dean's voice this time. It sent chills down the demon's spine and she hurried to skedaddle out of there. Sam looked lost, not quite sure how to take Ruby's weird behavior and seemingly unable to decide if he should adopt a bitch face or just a general constipated expression. Dean laughed at that. Sure, This little antic would raise his baby brother's suspicion levels, but witnessing this particular demon writhing in fear was so worth it. Demons, man, he said with an amused shake of his head, quickly darting inside the bathroom to grab his t-shirt. She really got freaked out by this thing. He pushed his shoulder with the scar forward, shooting a glance at it himself before pulling a t-shirt over his head. Sam now had his eyebrows knitted tightly together as he stared at Dean's shoulder. What is that? No idea, Dean replied flippantly, crossing the room to pick up a beer that he spotted earlier. If I had to guess, whoever yanked me out of hell left his mark on me. That, Sam's face sunk into itself with the force of his frown. That doesn't sound good, Dean. The other man let a soft, plopping carelessly on the couch and taking a gulp out of his beer. I don't think this is as bad as you're thinking, he argued. He lifted his hand up to stop his brother's lecture that he saw coming from miles away. I remember him, her, it, whatever. The being that lifted me up. Not a demon or any other evil son of a bitch we know. You remember hell? Dean blinked at the kid, not expecting him to latch on such a trivial detail. He rolled the bottle between his hands as he stared at Sam, his mind whirling with decisions of how much truth he should tell. I do, he conceded quietly. It's not a fun place. Sam opened his mouth and then shut it with a click of his teeth. I'm sorry, Dean, he uttered, his voice overflowing with unspoken guilt. I tried everything to pull you out, but no demon wanted to deal. I even tried to open the Devil's Gate. Nothing worked. A hand on his shoulder startled him and his head whipped up to see Dean standing in front of him. I'm so sorry. Dean's eyes softened, expression smoothing out into something gentle and kind. It's all right, Sammy. I know you did everything you could, he spoke, every word measured with heavy concern and laced with brotherly affection. I'm here now. I'm fine, so don't think about it anymore. Sam sniffed, brushing across his face and clearing unshed tears. Dean smiled at those teary hazel eyes. You good? Yeah, Sam replied. I'm good. They lapsed into a comfortable silence. Dean sprawled on the couch again and Sam took a seat nearby on the edge of the bed with his own beer in his hand. Sam, Dean called after taking a couple of sips from his drink. He leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees. When his little brother glanced at him, he cleared his throat and continued, I'm sorry too. For what? For dying. Dean tipped one shoulder in a shrug, like the reason for an apology wasn't really that important. For leaving you alone. Sam studied him for a moment. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't, Dean agreed, but I'm still sorry for leaving you alone to deal with all this shit. I'm back now, and we're gonna deal with it together. His voice was firm and solid, unyielding. Like always. Dean could see the exact moment when his brother worked through his speech and took it to heart, giving a reply of soft, okay. The sight of the kid's tense frame relaxing, smile on his tired face widening, back straightening up with his head held high, was nothing short of beautiful. Michael always was a good little soldier, doing everything his father had told him without any questions. Wallowing in denials of his own doubts, he pushed Lucifer away over and over again and judged it easier to betray his brother instead of siding with him and offering help, regardless how much he loved him. All because God commanded him to. He didn't even try to understand Gabriel or recognize the corruption gradually budding inside Raphael. Dean followed the same pattern to a T. John's little soldier first and foremost. Even when his brother needed his support against the man in order to have a chance at a normal life, to go to college, create a future for himself. Nope. For Dean, Dad's orders were above all, no matter how unreasonable they became with time. A shame sat like a chunk of ice in his guts when he recalled seriously considering John's final command at one point. Well, both Michael and Dean were done being good sons and good soldiers. For once he would be a good brother. He loved Sam too much and this time he would not fail the brother that needed his help and protection. It wasn't an attempt at redemption. Michael held no hope of earning forgiveness from Lucifer, but simply what he himself wished to do and not someone else compelled him to. Screw Father's plan. Screw Dad's orders. Screw Father's plan. Screw Dad's orders. Dean relaxed against the couch, finally fully content with himself. His two identities seemed to reach an agreement and now were in peace with each other. He touched his chest with his free hand, feeling comfortable warmth sitting just under his ribs. Dean's soul and Michael's grace remained in harmony, fitting perfectly together as if created for such purpose. Dean dared not to dwell on thoughts about what could that mean. He opted better to watch Sam, opening his newly regained senses to feel the kid's soul. His heart ached at all the injuries it had already sustained and would still gain in the future if he allowed the demon to poison his brother further. To help Sam, Dean had to get rid of Ruby. Which, honestly, would turn out to be harder to do than it should be, seeing how his little brother developed a genuine attachment to the skunk. Not entirely his fault. Lilith needed Sam obediently feeding from her lackey's palm so that he could be at their beck and call. Like a trained dog on a leash that they could sick on a target at the right time and place. Now, how to convince his brother that Ruby was up to no good? A frontal confrontation wouldn't work with Sam's personality, so he needed to find another way. Shifting slightly in his spot, Dean cleared his throat when Sam started frowning at his intense scrutiny. "I'm guessing you didn't come to plant flowers on my grave," he spoke casually. "What were you doing here?" "Well," the younger man paused, briefly considering his words. "Once I figured out I couldn't save you, I started hunting down Lilith, trying to get some payback." "With Ruby?" "Yeah, Dean, she really wants to help," Sam assured. Seeing the blank look from his brother, he added, "She's trying to track down Lilith so that we could kill her." Dean didn't say anything, he just sat there calmly with his head propped against his hand and just stared. Sam almost squirmed under his heavy gaze, his guard rising with every second that passed in silence. "What?" he snapped. "Did you know," Dean began, leaning forward to put his empty beer bottle on the table, "that the time in hell flows differently?" Sam stiffened at the mention of hell, but his furrowed brow showed that he had no idea what the other man was saying. 4 months here, Dean made a circle in the air with his finger before pointing it down, means 40 years downstairs. He watched as the kid's expression turned from not nearly a bitch face to the mask of absolute horror. Green eyes softened. He had planned to keep that information secret, but if using his brother's natural empathy would help to make a bigger impact in order to convince him, when there was no point in hiding it. "That is not a short time. I've seen and heard many things. Do you know how demons are made?" Sam simply gawked at him with wide eyes. Dean, he looked so young now. Scared, and the weight of the world seemed to settle on his shoulders again. That's all right, Sammy, I'm okay. It wasn't your fault," Dean soothed. "The reason why I'm telling you this is so that you'd believe me." At a sudden idea, he took his abandoned empty beer bottle. "Imagine that this is a human soul, the one that just went to hell. Naturally, human souls are pretty sturdy, you have no idea how many times I heard that from frustrated demons." A small smirk slipped on fallen Archangel's lips, admiration for his father's creation rising. Souls were truly a remarkable masterpiece. He wondered how he had never noticed this before. After a moment, his amusement vanished. The soul's innate durability and ability to remodel itself after deformation were exactly what Lucifer used to make the first demon, to pervert father's ingenuity and turn it against him. But down there, Dean continued, banishing any thought of his wayward angelic brother, after years of torture and conditioning, even human souls sustain injuries. Wounds and scars that get deeper and deeper and deeper until the sound of a beer bottle smashed into 1,000 glittering fragments against the table's hard surface cracked like thunder in the silent room. Sam flinched, face wrapped in a fierce scowl. "It shatters, and then, reassembles itself anew." Dean started picking up shards and putting them on top of each other. But manages to do so only in a wrong way, with corruption and vile essence of hell clinging to each of its pieces, twisting it further from what it's supposed to be. He carefully placed the last shard on a jagged, haphazardly built tower. With smaller bits stacked on top, its shape somewhat resembled its previous shape. And that, Sammy, is how demons are made. No matter how similar they might look to what they were, they are not the same anymore. Sam stared at the broken bottle, lips pursed and face taut. "I've seen it with my own eyes," Dean added as he reclined back against the sofa with a soft sigh. Of course, as a human, he couldn't quite perceive the soul's metamorphosis for what it was, but now, as an archangel, he knew exactly how and why it happened. After another minute, Dean heaved himself up with a nonchalant, "Anyway," and walked to pick up the trash can from the corner of the room. "Lilith is in Pontiac." He returned to the table, but his brother was still staring at the shard tower and obviously didn't hear the question. "Sam," Dean called before he swiftly swiped the shards into the trash can. Sam blinked, unearthing himself out of whatever thought process had consumed him. He glanced up at Dean and blinked once more. "What? Lilith is in Pontiac? Wah. No, the younger hunter muttered, rubbing his eyes with his index and thumb as if trying to massage away the headache. He visibly shook himself before speaking again. "I was checking these demons out of Tennessee, and out of nowhere they took a hard left, booked up here. Dean raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. When? Today early morning. Dean almost smacked himself. An angel's touch sent ripples of purifying power throughout the surrounding area, making it a holy ground and, at the same time, a shiny beacon for all the evil sons of bitches out there. As expected, demons would come to investigate. It was, after all, the matter of self-preservation. An angel walking the earth was a thing of true terror for them and they needed to make sure it wasn't true. You should call Bobby, Dean abruptly stated. Before Sam's inevitable, why, he explained, if your demons came here at the moment I busted out, there may be more of them coming. We should clear the place before leaving. Sporting a troubled expression, the other man nodded, rummaging through his pockets in search of his phone. Don't tell him I'm up and running, Dean said as Sam dialed the number and waited for Bobby to answer. His youngest brother shot him a bitch face in full effect which only made Dean grin. A moment later, Sam's expression relaxed. Hey, Bobby, he greeted before frowning. Yeah, I know, I should have called sooner. He pinching his nose bridge, listening to what was definitely a scolding. Sorry, Bobby, I was pretty messed up. A pause. I need help. With the hunt. It's demons. A few of them. I'm at. Dean didn't pay attention to the address Sam rattled out into the phone, instead, he finished cleaning the mess he made on the table. The remaining shards clinked sharply against the ones already in the trash can. Reacting to the sound, Sam turned around and eyed his brother from head to toe. Hey, Bobby, can you bring Dean's duffel bag with his clothes? He rolled his eyes at something the old hunter was saying which sounded like, Idjit, what have ya done? Or something along the line. No, I haven't done anything stupid. On the other side of the room, Dean hid his snort of laughter at that comment. Oh, boy, his youngest brother sure did something very stupid. He just didn't know it yet. See you soon, Bobby. Sam slid the phone back into his pocket. Bobby will be here tonight. Awesome. Dean's stomach grumbled. He shuffled his feet before clearing his throat. Let's get something to eat. A wide grin broke on his face at the thought of food. I'm starving. Sam tore his gaze from the laptop, leaned against the couch with a weary sigh, and closed his eyes to rest for a few minutes. Instantly, his mind brought him to the broken bottle and shard tower. And that, Sammy, is how demons are made. A groan of frustration slipped from his mouth. Sam rubbed his eyes before glancing at the big bundle in the middle of the king bed. Dean loved to sleep sprawled all over the bed, with his limbs stretched in every direction. Now, though, his brother huddled up into the smallest ball he could manage with his bulky frame and hid completely under the blankets. As if trying to protect himself from the non-existent threats. Sam still couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that it was 40 years for Dean in hell. He didn't even try to imagine what kind of horrors his brother had to live through. Maybe, he didn't want to imagine, to really know what happened down there. Unbidden, the image of the shard tower slithered to the forefront of his mind again. Dean felt so different when he talked about it. Old and wise, two traits that Sam would have never associated with his big brother until now. The treacherous voice came back, whispering to him that Dean didn't just felt different, that he was different. That maybe he wasn't his brother at all. Dean's attitude only strengthened the suspicions. He acted like nothing was wrong with him, had smiled more times during this day than in the past year, way too happy and carefree for a man who just busted out of hell. Sam frowned at his own train of thoughts. It's not like he wasn't pleased that Dean wasn't a broken shell of a man. He felt thrilled, really, but that kind of happy-go-lucky attitude couldn't be healthy. Perhaps his brother was too broken to function normally back in this world. Sam wondered if it was safe to take him on the hunts. What if Dean would crack under the pressure? A knock woke Sam from his musings. He stood up, crossed the room, shooting a quick look at the hidden bundle on the bed, and opened the door. The grumpy glare he got from Bobby made him roll his eyes. Bobby, good to see you, he greeted, backing to the side and motioning the old hunter to enter. After a quick half-hug as a greeting, Bobby made his way into the room. A duffel bag landed on the floor with a heavy thump. So, boy, the man started, taking a sharp turn to glare at Sam, what did ya do? Sam knitted his brow, genuinely confused. What do you mean? You didn't show up or call for 4 months after Dean's, Bobby trailed off, unable to say the last word. The wound was still too deep, too fresh to mention it out loud. He straightened his shoulders and continued, and suddenly you want help on a demon hunt, in addition to asking for Dean's clothes. Sam huffed, exasperated. Before he could retort, A groggy voice drifted from the bed, "That's because those clothes are for me. You tend to get dirty while crawling out of your own grave." Bobby went rigid for a moment, then whirled in the direction of the voice, eyes wide in utter disbelief. A sleepy smile appeared on Dean's face. "Hey, Bobby," he said softly. The old hunter stepped back with a stammered, "What?" still not willing to believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. "I don't belly, Dean." Dean stared at the old man, chest swelling with fondness. With two absentee fathers, Bobby was the closest thing to the father Dean or Michael had who hadn't bailed on him. Bobby had always been there for him, had stuck through thick and thin. And, damn it all, Michael loved this human too. Bobby jumped when Sam's hand landed on his shoulder. The younger man smiled at him as his startled eyes met his. "It's him, Bobby. I checked him already, it's really Dean," he assured. Dean wrestled himself out of the blankets. As soon as he stood up from the bed, Bobby crushed him into the tight bear hug, barely able to hold his tears from spilling. Dean embraced him in return, smiling in delight. Universally, angels were called beings of love and compassion, yet only after becoming a human, Michael realized how different the same feeling could be. Yes, they all were capable of loving their father or each other, but it was clinical love, almost impersonal. Something they were told to do and they continued doing it without truly comprehending what love was. The depth of the same emotion surging from the human soul was unfathomable. Michael felt proud that he could feel the love how humans felt it and receive the same in return from the people so dear. Bobby pulled away and glanced over his boy. Dean looked good, unhurt, and had that vivid mischievous spark in his eyes which was always present in his childhood. It slowly faded away during his adolescence until there was no trace of it left at all. Bobby had to hold the tears in as he peered at those bright pools of green. He took a moment to clear his throat around the giant lump of Dean is alive. "It's good to see you, boy." "Yeah, you too," Dean said, patting Bobby on his shoulder. A simple action, but it brought the desired result. Bobby's teary gaze cleared and sharpened. "But, how did ya bust out?" "Someone yanked me out from hell," Dean replied and then added with a smirk, "So, here I am." "That doesn't make a lick of sense," Bobby grumbled, taking a seat on the back of the couch. "Dean, your chest was ribbons, your insides were slop, and you've been buried for 4 months." Lifeless Dean on the floor. So utterly still, unmoving, eyes wide open, but now vacant and staring hopelessly into the heavens. Once handsome features ghostly pale, marred by horrid claw marks, and face frozen into a rigid grimace of fear. Flowing blood, thick and sluggish, from numerous gashes across his body. And the smell, oh, the smell, a sickly sweet. Sam's breath hitched when someone patted him on his back. He snapped his head to the person standing next to him. Dean smiled at him, a gentle, reassuring curl of his lips. Not stiff and agape as he remembered. "Even if you could slip out of hell and back into your meat suit." Bobby continued, oblivious to the mute exchange between brothers. "Well, there was not much of that meat suit left in the first place." Dean just shrugged, short and unhelpful, and that could be taken either way. "How are ya feeling?" "I'm alive, and before you ask, no, I don't feel anything strange. Nothing demonic or whatever. I'm all alone in here." Dean motioned over himself. "There are no extra passengers." The older hunter hummed thoughtfully. His eyes darted to Sam, who didn't look away from his big brother since the moment he mentioned Dean's death. Awfully quiet, Sam. You wouldn't know anything about it." Sam immediately turned to him and returned the gaze of seeking narrowed eyes with a sour look. "No. Really." Bobby sounded anything but convinced. "You were pretty stubborn to find a way to get your brother back." Hard lines of rage tightened Sam's face. "It wasn't me, all right. I tried, but nothing worked." Weight of Dean's hand on his shoulder stopped his angry outburst. Comforting warmth instantly calmed him down, his posture relaxed. The Dean from back then was cold and stiff and dead. Sam looked at his brother again. This Dean was warm and breathing and alive. Dean squeezed Sam's shoulder, anchoring him further to here and now, chasing the unseen ghosts that threatened to pull his brother to a very bad place. "It wasn't a demon deal," he said to Bobby. Bobby shook his head. "How do you know that?" "You, Winchesters, always do stupid." "Because I remember," Dean interrupted. "As I told Sam, the being that pulled me out, pretty sure that wasn't a demon." The other man stared at him incredulously. "Then what?" he asked. "If I had to guess," Dean glanced from one human to another, ready to gauge their reaction. "An angel." Hunters blinked. "An angel," Bobby echoed, his eyebrows rising to his hairline in an honest astonishment. Well, Sam started carefully like he was afraid to spook someone, there is much more lore on angels than on any other supernatural creature. Your theory, it's possible, I suppose. An angel, Bobby repeated. Really? After another Dean's shrug, he blew a deep breath out. All right, we need help, he decided. I know a psychic a few hours from here. Something this big, maybe she's heard the other side talking. Dean mentally groaned. Psychic. Wonderful. He didn't feel comfortable around those while he was just a human, but now meeting one would be a real walk on eggshells. Despite the huge difference in power levels, humans had what angels lacked: curiosity, imagination, and, most importantly, an unhealthy amount of distrust of something they didn't fully understand. I think that's a great idea, Sam agreed. Bobby stood up to make a call. I'll be right back. Pamela Barnes. Best damn psychic in the state. Pamela Barnes wasn't like Dean imagined her to be, but of course, she had to be the best. Dean greeted a young, gorgeous woman with his finest business smile plastered on while cursing his luck in the privacy of his head. Why did Bobby know only the best ones? He could use the worst psychic right about now. Pamela let out a soft, her eyes narrowing just a tiny bit as she stared at the man in front of her. After a moment, the brief flash of doubt disappeared and a wide friendly smile bloomed in its place. Dean Winchester, she said. Out of the fire and back in the frying pan, huh? Makes you a rare individual. She had no idea just how rare he was. Oh, yeah, Dean replied, his smile taking a flirty edge. I'm one in a million sort of guy. Pamela raised an eyebrow. We'll see about that. She turned away to invite them into the house, but not before Dean caught a wink and a coy smirk directed to him. Dean felt more at ease. That was how one should shake the psychic of their "you're not fully human" case. The bliss didn't last long. More precisely, right until they made the preparations for a séance, and everyone sat around the table. I was thinking, Dean spoke, uncertain how to persuade them not to do it. Maybe we shouldn't go spying at the being that can penetrate hell and snatch a soul from there. Why not? Sam asked. Just a peek at it could burn your eyes out of your skull, for all we know. Don't worry, Dean, Pamela smiled brightly at him. I'll be fine. Now take each other's hands. She waited till everyone held hands and turned to Dean again. It would be easier if I could touch something our mystery monster touched. Her gaze sharpened. He didn't like it, not one bit. If I'm not mistaken, it left some sort of mark on you. Dean's mind whirred. Peeking at angels was dangerous. No mortal could withstand even the briefest glance at their kind's true form, psychic or not. He deceived Sam with his demon knowledge because he had just returned from hell. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to explain his knowledge of angels. You sure this is the only way? Dean could almost hear his brother's bitch face as the latter bit out, Dean. Bobby's glower from the other side of the table agreed completely with Sam. Fine, he grumbled as he pulled one arm from his flannel and rolled a t-shirt sleeve up, revealing the handprint scar on the shoulder. He would just have to go along and see how this would turn out. Bobby seemed startled by the sight of it, but Pamela showed no sign of surprise, despite seeing something like the for the first time. All right, she said, gently placing a hand on the mark. The psychic took a deep breath and started chanting, I invoke, conjure, and command you, appear unto me before this circle. After several repeats, the TV suddenly fizzled and snapped to static. The table started to shake. The familiar feeling of an angel's grace washed over Dean even before Pamela fully established the connection. The angel quickly shielded himself before the psychic noticed him, and warned the human to turn back. Castiel. Pamela tried the name. No, sorry, Castiel, I don't scare easily. I conjure and command you, show me your face. While ascending from hell, Dean was only a confused and frightened human. Even if he regained his angelic memories at the end, without his grace, there was no way for him to recognize the angel who rescued him. Especially when Michael never was particularly interested in getting to know all of his younger siblings. Their names, however, were engraved into his mind from the beginning of time, so he knew about Castiel, though had never met him as Michael. A good soldier, extremely loyal, never questioning his orders, and one of the youngest garrison captains. And also his savior. In some sense, Castiel was his guardian angel. Dean almost laughed out loud at the sheer absurdity of his predicament. His mirth died when Pamela pushed forward, ignoring all the warnings from the angel. That was not good. Coming to the same conclusion, Bobby suggested, maybe we should stop. Pamela gritted her teeth. I almost got it, she insisted. I conjure and command you, show me your face. He couldn't wait any longer. Dean jerked from Pamela's touch, using a tiny bit of his own grace to disrupt the connection before the human lost her eyes the moment his sibling's true form came into view. None of the participants should have noticed it. Pamela jumped from her chair, eyes wide with alarm. She backed away from Dean until her back hit the wall. What are you? Apparently, luck was not on his side today. Well, crap. What are you? A protest, a defense, an explanation instantly formed in Dean's mind, only to quiet into the silence of the room and the startled gazes of three humans. No, he couldn't come clean. Not here, not now. Sam and Bobby didn't yet have knowledge that angels existed, and the concept that one of the angels fell to earth and got reborn as a human would sound too unbelievable to them at this point. All they would hear from his story most likely would end up summed into, he's not real Dean. And, honestly, Dean didn't have enough power to defend himself in the worst-case scenario without hurting them. So, no, telling them his true identity wasn't an option right now. Time for some improvisation then. What was he? Kind of a big deal, thanks for noticing, a joke rolled off Dean's tongue before he could catch himself. Unsurprisingly, it fell flat, his smirk faded, and he threw his arms up. Oh, come on, seriously, he asked incredulously. How many times do I have to prove that I'm me? He didn't even need to fake the desperation in his voice, he was desperate enough for them to believe him at this moment. A little bit of tension left Sam's shoulders. He cleared his throat and glanced at Pamela. What exactly did you feel? The psychic narrowed her eyes at Dean, who spread his arms to the side in a clear, come at me, pose. A minute ticked by as she stared at him, searching. Bobby's patience ran out first. Well, he urged. Pamela shook her head, brow furrowed in confusion. Just before I lost the connection, I felt the burst of power from Dean, she spoke slowly, lifting her head to gaze at Dean again, still suspicious. The same kind I felt from that Castiel. Dean snorted. That's ridiculous, he said with finality. If it was just the brief feeling of his grace touching her powers, this shouldn't be hard to misdirect. He pointed at his shoulder and the palm mark burned into his flesh. Maybe, it has something to do with this thing. The thing that Castiel left. Sam and Bobby shared a look, both considering it. Pamela seemed to be shaken by what he thought was the truth too. She hesitated before asking, can I come closer and check? Once again, Dean spread his arms to the side as an invite with a snappy, go ahead. It was a bit risky, because Pamela certainly was the best damn psychic in the state, but it also meant the fastest and the best way to be cleared of any suspicion. Pamela approached carefully, still wary. Reaching out, she cupped Dean's face with her hands, staring straight into his eyes. Dean tucked his grace closer to his soul, making sure that not a single drop of it leaked out. After an excruciatingly long moment, she heaved a soft sigh, her shoulders relaxing. Hey, you wanna do an even closer inspection? Dean said, lips tilting into a flirty grin. I'd be up to it. Pamela withdrew her hands and slapped him playfully over his shoulder. He's fine, she declared to the other two in the room. Her gaze still held some of the wariness, but the majority of it disappeared by now. It must have been power fluctuations between the mark and its owner. Ya know who that owner is exactly? Bobby asked. Pamela leaned against the table with her arms crossed. I don't. I couldn't take a good look, but what I did see was, her brow furrowed. Well, it's more of a feeling rather than a sight, but whatever that is, it's immense. Immense, Sam echoed. What does it mean? It's a powerful creature, that's for sure, but I don't know what it is, Pamela replied with a shrug. Sam blew the air out of his lungs. So, we're pretty much back at square one. I'm sorry, boys, for not being much of a help. Bobby also sighed, took off his ball cap, brushed his hand through his hair, and put it back on. Can you, boys, wait for me in the car? He told the brothers. I'll have a quick talk with Pamela and be right there too. Sure, Bobby, Sam was quick to agree. He offered a small hand wave and a brief smile as goodbye to Pamela and clapped his older brother over his shoulder. Come on, Dean. Throwing his jacket on, Dean winked at Pamela and instantly got a grin back. It was all good now. She wasn't wary anymore, it seemed, so he could leave with a calm mind. Dude, she was so into me, Dean stated the moment the door of the house closed behind them. She really wanted to get her hands on me. No matter what. Sam barked out a short laugh as he walked around the Impala to reach the passenger side. She'd eat you alive. Hey, I just got out of jail. I'm ready, Dean retorted with confidence. Right, baby, he asked, stroking his car's roof. You're the only one who always has my back. Sam gave him the most deadpan stare. Seriously, Dean? What? Dean blinked innocently before cooing over the Impala further. Don't mind him, sweetheart, he's just jealous of us. Sam rolled his eyes, the edges of his mouth twitching into a fond curve. Should I give you two some quality time alone? Don't be jealous, bitch. Don't make out with your car in front of me, jerk. After Bobby came back from his talk with Pamela, the trio decided to go back to Pontiac to clean up the demons first. Finding out what kind of creature Castiel was and what exactly he wanted from Dean was important, but they were still hunters and had their duty. But before they moved back to the hotel to hatch a plan, they agreed to make a stop at the diner. Or more precisely, Dean whined the other two's ears off how much he wanted to eat pie right now until they gave in. Dean grinned like an idiot all the way to Pontiac after that. Who could fault him? While he wasn't fully human anymore due to the sliver of grace fluttering inside his ribcage, he wasn't fully an angel either. And until this was the case, he wanted to enjoy everything human life could offer to its full extent. Besides, he just spent 40 years in hell, he deserved to spoil himself a little. As they approached the diner, Dean's new senses picked on several disgusting, slimy presences in the vicinity. His brow furrowed. Demons were nearby and were getting closer. When he maneuvered Baby into the diner's parking lot right after Bobby's car, he already knew that this place was exactly where all these demons congregated. He could sense a total of 6 of them. This was a dangerous situation. Extremely dangerous. Dean didn't worry about himself, he had enough power now to not die at the very least. The same couldn't be said about Sam or Bobby though. He also couldn't think of a good reason why he would know that demons took over the diner, but he wasn't about to let his loved ones simply walk into a potential ambush. You know, on another thought, takeouts sound good enough, Dean said as they all climbed out of their cars. He immediately walked off to the diner with a cheery, I volunteer to buy them, you two can wait here. And a grin over his shoulder, not even waiting for the other two's inputs. Sam just blinked in confusion, sharing a glance with equally confused Bobby. Buy me a pie too. He yelled and got a thumb up as a signal that he heard it. He leaned against the Impala, arms crossed, and stared after his brother until he disappeared inside the diner. You think Dean's acting weird? Bobby fixed his ball cap before leaning against his car's roof. For a moment he kept his eyes on the diner door. Nah, he said eventually. Dean's been through a lot. Anyone would have their heads messed up by something like that. Give him time. Sam couldn't argue with logic. But 40 years in hell changed his brother. They were subtle things, not that important in the grand scheme of things, but they existed and Sam would lie to himself if he said those small, hardly significant changes didn't bother him. Did Pamela say anything? Bobby scowled at him. She's sure Dean's human, he replied. Ya got any reason to suspect she's wrong? Sam rubbed a hand across his face, then brushed his hair back. I don't know, I guess not. Sam, if your instincts tell you. A high-pitched, whining sound pierced their eardrums a split second before an explosion tore through the diner's windows and door. Shards of glass and debris of window blinds blasted into the air like deadly confetti followed by a blinding flash that turned the world white for a heartbeat. On instinct, Sam and Bobby threw themselves down on the ground, covering their heads for protection. When no other sound came, Sam peeked from behind his arm and stared at the destroyed diner in stunned horror. No fire could be seen through shattered windows and broken blinds. No smoke rising, no screams or shouts or wails of terrors and pain. Only deadly silence. And his brother was still inside. For a moment, Sam's heart seemed to freeze. And then it restarted, reaching a frightening speed in an instant, threatening to erupt from his chest. His hands started to tremble and he bolted from his spot with an alarmed, Dean. He burst inside, pausing at the entrance to sweep the area with his eyes. A few overturned tables, but nothing seemed broken, except everything made out of glass. Not a normal explosion, then. Glass crunched loudly under his boots as Sam walked inside, carefully looking around. Dean, he called. His heart jumped into his throat when he noticed a man's body lying on his stomach in the middle of the diner. He didn't relax even after realizing that the body wore unfamiliar clothes. Not his brother, so where was he? Cracking shards announced Bobby coming from behind. Can you see him? He asked, tone heavy and subdued. Sam shook his head, crouching next to the body to check its vitals but found none. He flipped the body over and immediately jerked away from it. The eye sockets were empty, charred black from inside and out to the point where even blood vessels got burned shut. Eyeballs were completely gone, their liquefied remains caked on the man's cheek. Sam put a hand on his mouth as nausea rocketed his insides. Balls, Bobby swore, looking over Sam's shoulder at the body. Dean, can you hear me, boy? He hollered, scanning the diner. From their position, they could see other bodies strewn around. A few had their faces directed toward them, empty charred eye sockets staring wretchedly at them. A soft cough came from somewhere, and the hunters pricked their ears. Sam slid his hand under the jacket and squeezed the handle of the demon-killing knife. Another cough, here. Both men moved across the diner in the direction of the weak, hoarse voice. Sam was the first one to spy Dean, slumped against the wall in the corner, half hidden by the toppled-over table. Dean, he rushed forward, pushed the table away, and crouched next to his brother, frantic eyes examining his body to make sure he was okay. Blood trailed down Dean's face from his closed eyes. Sam sucked in a breath. Are you all right, Dean? He asked, grabbing his brother's hand that the latter extended to his general direction. Peachy, Dean muttered under his breath. He let Sam haul him up, leaning against him for support. Hissing, he dared to open his eyes into narrow slits. Vision's a bit blurry, though. He winced when the daylight hit his retinas, shutting his eyes again instantly after that. Sam let air rush out of his lungs and it came out as a relieved laughter. Be happy that you still have your eyes, man. What happened? Bobby inquired, grabbing Dean from the other side to help him walk. These people here, Dean waved his hand around, indicating the corpses around the diner, were demons. All of them, the ones we were looking for. Sam carefully sidestepped one of the bodies, maneuvering Dean around it. Bobby nervously looked around for the last time before the three of them left the diner. So, how did they end up dead? They ambushed me the moment I stepped over the threshold, started asking questions. Sam frowned. What kind of questions? He asked, motioning Bobby to take all Dean's weight while he opened the Impala's passenger door. About how or why I was pulled out of hell. They lowered Dean into the seat and he sunk into it with a tired sigh, throwing his arm across his injured eyes. Doesn't answer the question of how they ended up dead, Bobby pointed out. Or why their eyes burned out of their skulls. Castiel killed them. A beat of silence. Sam and Bobby shared a bewildered glance. Dean said it with such ease and assurance as if it wasn't shocking at all, but something to be expected. They didn't know how to feel about this news, dropped on them like a bomb. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the air, and they hurried to flee the scene. Sam and Bobby left him alone on their way back to the hotel, but Dean knew it wouldn't last long. And he was right. The moment he plopped on the bed, they grew impatient. You said Castiel did all that? Sam asked, taking a seat on the couch. Yeah, Dean groaned at the ache in his eyes, regardless of his grace already healing the injuries and taking off the sharpest pain. Can I get a wet towel, please? Bobby was ahead and brought him the towel just as he was asking for it. Here, he said, guiding Dean's hand to it. When the latter draped a cold, wet towel over his eyes and sighed in satisfaction, he asked, Did ya see it? No, it was the truth. Dean didn't see Castiel, the state of his eyes notwithstanding. The angel had been careful to not show his true form directly to him, though it seemed that even the light of the smiting caused damage to his sight. Despite this body being the true vessel of the Archangel, it wasn't spared of the inherent fragility of human forms. It was a paradox that such delicate and mortal shells could serve as vessels for forces far beyond their nature, possessing an extraordinary capacity to contain and channel the immense powers of the divine and the infernal. Like a glass jar able to contain a storm. Throughout eons of existence, Dean never thought about how it was possible. Such juxtaposition of weakness and strength, fragility and sturdiness, made the human body a unique and enigmatic creation. How fascinating, be it human physical bodies or their souls. Bobby interrupted his musings with a question, how do ya know that it was Castiel who killed the demons then? Who else could it be? Dean replied, sounding nonchalant about the fact. I figured that if Castiel went through such troubles to pull me out of hell, he's probably invested in me staying alive. For whatever reason. Bobby frowned, before shrugging. Seems logical. Why are you so sure? Sam chimed in. We don't even know what kind of creature it is. That's exactly why, Dean said. When no one spoke, he elaborated, have you ever seen someone else dealing with demons this way? Silence. Of course, they didn't. The corner of his lips twitched up. So, That's why. Sam stayed silent, fingers drumming on his knee. Okay, makes sense, I guess, he agreed after a moment. That aside, you said demons ambushed you and started asking questions. Dean let out a quiet hum of agreement instead of speaking. It means demons know diddly squat about what's happening. Sure looks like that, Bobby agreed. It'd also mean it really wasn't the demon that pulled your brother out of hell. A look at Dean lying motionlessly on the bed made his brow crease. How are ya doing, kid? It took a moment for Dean to muster enough energy to answer. My eyes are killing me. Not entirely true anymore, because his grace worked wonders in soothing the damage, he simply started to feel sleepy. Sam stared at his brother, searching his face for any sign of distress. Finding none, he hesitated, but still suggested, maybe we should take you to the hospital, check your eyes. Nah, Dean waved his hand in a dismissive motion. Just let me take a nap, and I'll be as good as new. Dean, Sam, the weariness in his big brother's voice was all that was needed for Sam to shut up. He observed Dean getting more comfortable for sleep and dozing off almost immediately. Sam stood up and began pacing the room, restlessly rubbing his forehead. He occasionally glanced at the sleeping form in the bed before continuing to wear a hole in the floor. Finally, Bobby sighed in surrender. We should let Dean rest, he said quietly. Let's talk outside. Sam nodded absent-mindedly, obviously stewing over thoughts running rampant inside his head. They left the room and settled down in an empty lounge area, around the corner. Bobby opened his mouth to ask what had gotten into Sam, but the boy beat him to it. We need to summon that damn thing, Bobby. Bobby gawked at him. You can't be serious. I can, and I am. Sam looked and sounded adamant. We still don't know what it is. It's obviously something we had never dealt with before, Bobby argued. It could be anything. I know we've already crossed the demon out of the list, but maybe it's the one we'd never heard of before. Not like hell is short on demons. It could even be an angel like Dean said. The problem is Dean. Sam shot up from his seat with a shout, starting to pace again. Meaning, something is off, I just can't figure out what exactly, Sam spoke as he paced back and forth. I'm worried about that mark this Castiel, left on Dean. Pamela said she felt power fluctuations between the mark and the owner, right? What if, he cut himself off and stopped, worrying his lower lip. What if Castiel somehow controls Dean through that? Bobby finished for him. That's not, the denial died in Sam's throat. He knitted his brow. I don't think he's being controlled, more like, influenced by it. Dean's too relaxed even though some unknown creature is stalking him. And also, do you remember what Dean said at Pamela's? He paused, fixing the other man with a hard stare. Just a peek at it could burn your eyes out of your skull. Bobby dragged a hand down his face. And demons truly did get their eyes burned out of their skulls. And that's why we have to face that thing head on. Bobby shook his head. This is a bad idea. I know, but we have to do something. What about Dean? Are ya gonna tell him what we're planning to do? Sam glanced in the direction where his room was. No, Dean's sleeping, so he may return before he even wakes up. Or not return at all, Bobby muttered, standing from his seat. Sam shot him a bitch face, and he lifted his arms in a mock surrender. All right, no need to get your panties in a twist. Dean Winchester. Pain sliced through his skull and Dean's hands shot up to cover his ears even before he was fully awake. It wasn't as painful as it was back in the gas station, still too human and not enough angel to withstand an angel's true voice, but it still hurt. Dean's head snapped up when he heard a sharp crack. His eyes widened seeing multiple cracks across the mirror on the ceiling. Any moment, it would shatter and rain shards all over the room. Shut up, Castiel. The painful, high-pitched sound ceased instantly. Dean blinked. Lifting his hands off his ears just a tiny bit, he tested if it was truly safe. The only thing he could hear was white noise from the TV. Castiel did shut up, thankfully. Geez, Dean muttered under his breath, checking his palms. At least, no blood vessels popped in his ears this time. You wanna talk, buddy? Find a way without blowing my eardrums off. He could feel the ethereal presence of the angel slowly rise and disappear. About time Castiel jumped into his vessel and showed up for the talk. Glancing up at the mirror, Dean decided that it would hold for a good while and he didn't have to worry. Sam and Bobby didn't seem to be around, probably away to get some beer while he slept. Dean massaged his ear for the last time, then stood up from the bed to turn off the TV. He picked Sam's laptop from the coffee table and made himself comfortable on the couch. The absence of those two gave a great opportunity for Dean to start searching for a trace of another piece of his grace. He didn't want to miss it. As he scoured the internet, he looked for very precise signs, something only he could recognize. Normal people would ignore them and hunters would deem them not supernatural enough. He specifically designed it to work this way when he threw those pieces down to earth. After an hour, neither Sam nor Bobby returned, and Dean started to get worried. He reached for his flip phone to make a call to his brother, but before he could do that, something in the constant stream of angelic chatter caught his attention. Castiel was saying humans were calling for him through summoning and asked for further orders. Dean snorted. Summon an angel? Were they tired of their own eyeballs and eardrums? Why would someone do that, and who would be stupid enough to even try to summon an Aang? Dean's thoughts came to an abrupt halt when the answer hit him like a ton of bricks. Sam and Bobby. Jumping to his feet with his phone in hand, Dean pressed to call Sam and began pacing back and forth around the room as he listened to insistent beeping. Come on, Sam, pick up. He cursed when the call soon got sent straight to the auto answer. He dropped it and redialed Bobby's number. Pick up, pick up, pick up. Unfortunately, it didn't yield any results either. On the third try, Sam finally answered. Hey, Dean. What the hell are you two doing? What do you mean? We couldn't sleep, so we went for some beer and burgers. Dean groaned, rubbing at his eyes in sheer frustration. Why did they think summoning a being that killed multiple demons with ease was a good idea? A being they knew absolutely nothing about. Not only were they doing something so dangerous, but also hiding it from him. Don't lie to me, Sam. I know you're doing something stupid. We're not doing anything. Why do you even think so? Because why else would you leave without me, knowing that someone, something, is after me? Dean, that's not. There was a short silence on the other end after that. When Sam spoke again, his tone carried an obvious urgency. Did something happen? Dean paused and glanced up at the cracked mirror. No need to worry his little brother over nothing, so he cleared his throat and said, no. Nothing happened. He proceeded to walk across the room again, but then there was a soft fluttering sound, and Dean almost bumped into a man who suddenly blocked his track. He froze and his mind went blank for a split second as he gawked at that unfamiliar face a few inches from his own. Hello, Dean. Dean jumped with a startled, son of a. His phone slipped out from his grasp when he threw his arms up, backing away from the stranger. He fumbled to catch it, only resulting in him accidentally snapping it shut, ending the call. Dean could only hope now that Sam wouldn't misunderstand the situation. Hello, Dean. A pause. Son of a. No more sounds followed. Sam pulled his phone from his ear and frowned at it, seeing the call not going through anymore. He didn't recognize the man's voice that suddenly cut in. His brother was also obviously startled by whoever it was. Could it be a hotel service or something? Sam pressed the button to redial and waited patiently for those few seconds until it connected. Only for it to disconnect immediately. Frustrated, he pressed the redial button again. This is Dean Winchester. If this is an emergency, leave a me. Sam shut the voicemail off and pursed his lips into a thin line. Who was that? Who was the owner of that unfamiliar voice? And why Dean's phone was off now? What happened? Bobby asked from where he was sitting on the old wooden table. Various tools and magic ingredients lay on top of it. They were in the middle of an old, abandoned barn, surrounded by myriads of devil traps and protection symbols from all kinds of religions and beliefs painted on its walls and floor. Someone seemed to startle Dean, Sam replied as he continued to glare at his phone as if it was its fault. And now his phone is off. Bobby jumped off the table, suddenly alert. Have any idea who that someone is? Sam shook his head, finally pushing his phone back into his pocket. We have to go back, he said as he grabbed the demon-killing knife from the table next to him. Dean might be in trouble. Bobby nodded. It was quite obvious that the summoning failed. They had been sitting here for an hour and no one showed up. Or maybe someone did, just in the wrong place. The same thought circled in both their heads, so Sam and Bobby hurried to collect weapons and other things that might be useful and rushed to their car. Dean stared at his phone in dismay. He hoped Sam wouldn't misunderstand, but he totally did, didn't he? We need to talk, Dean. Dean looked at the man that appeared out of nowhere. A suit with a loose tie and a trench coat on top, black disheveled hair, and a blank expression gave the stranger quite a messy appearance. He didn't recognize his face, but he certainly was familiar with his presence. He clung to it as a desperate soul. He was on his way out of hell and he often felt it looming around him after he returned to Earth. The brave seraph warrior who brought him out of the pit. His younger brother, Castiel. He had never met the younger angel before when he was Michael, but he knew about him. Extremely loyal and a good soldier, never questioning his orders, Castiel was one of the youngest garrison captains. Dean instinctively tucked his grace closer to his soul. Too early to reveal his true identity. He didn't know which side Castiel supported in this joke of a plan. Was the angel genuinely trying to stop the apocalypse or simply pretending to? Michael's grace was incomplete and so far from its true form, Castiel wouldn't recognize him anyway and think that another angel took over the Archangel's true vessel. Regardless of his allegiance, neither side would be happy to know that. He would never admit that he also hated to appear weak. He would rather be taken as a human being with all their inherent fragility than the underpowered Archangel that couldn't even put up a fight against a common angel, not to mention a seraph. The mere thought of it made Dean deeply uncomfortable. He was startled when his phone rang. It had to be Sam calling him back. Dean was about to flip his phone open, ready to explain to his brother that he was fine and no, nothing bad happened. Castiel waved his hand, and the phone died. Energy zapped out of its battery in an instant. Did you have to do that? Dean couldn't help but complain as he motioned helplessly at his now useless phone. We need to talk, Castiel repeated, his brow crinkling for a fraction of what seemed to be impatience. Alone. Dean dragged his hand down his face with a groan. It felt like he was doing this very often lately, but who could fault him? People around him kept doing stupid things, and if he knew Sam and Bobby, and he definitely did, then they were going to show up guns blazing sooner or later. Despite his frustration, his chest warmed at the thought of someone being protective of him. It had been so long for Michael to feel this way. Not since he rejected Lucifer so many years ago. Fine, Dean exhaled, expelling the last line of thought out of his head with more force than was necessary. Let's talk. He threw his phone on the bed and gave Castiel his undivided attention. You know, now when my ears aren't bleeding. Castiel's gaze dropped to the ground. That was my mistake. Apologies, he said before looking back at Dean with those intense blue eyes. I am surprised that you can perceive my true voice, but it still has hurt you. Dean shrugged. His body was human through and through, but he could also hear the other angels chatter in the corner of his mind, so for him, it didn't seem that weird. Doesn't matter now, he dismissed it with a hand wave. Better tell me, why would an angel rescue me from hell? With a slight tilt of his head to one side, Castiel narrowed his eyes. You know who I am. I remember the being that lifted me out of the hot box. Figured that it can't be anything else but an angel. You remember, Castiel echoed, his gaze intensifying even more. Most intriguing. Dean folded his arms in front of his chest almost defensively. He couldn't let his sibling think about it for too long lest he would start to suspect something. Why'd you do it? The angel straightened up, his curious expression melting back into his previous, stoic one. Because God commanded it, he said. Because we have work for you. Right, God. Dean had wondered if the mishap in his plan was his missing father's doing. After all, the plan was to stay human only for Nay's cycle, and he specifically inscribed a single fragment of his grace with the order to find its way to him so that he could regain his memories. Well, considering that he carried that fragment with him for almost his entire life as Dean, that part of the plan worked to a certain extent and the inscribed piece most likely followed him throughout all of his reincarnations. He just never regained his memories. Not until Castiel's grace made contact with his soul as he snatched him from hell. Such timing screamed deliberate interference, no matter how hard he thought about it. If the failure in his plan was due to God's intervention and not simply because of his miscalculation, Dean had to wonder what exactly his father tried to achieve by this course of action. And, Dean cleared his throat, did God give you that order personally? Because if he did, it would change everything. I am a common soldier, Castiel replied, furrowing his brow. The order was given by God through the chain of command. Dean gave him a blank stare. Father probably was still absent from heaven. It meant that the order didn't come from him personally, at least not at the current time. He did write the apocalypse plan out a long time ago, but only the highest echelon of the host knew it. Someone at the top kick-started the apocalypse all by themselves. As far as Dean knew, with him gone, Raphael should have taken the rule of heaven. The order must have come from him. But then again, his father loved humanity and at the same time, he made the plan to destroy it. Something didn't add up here. The righteous man who began it was the only one who could finish it, it was part of God's plan, something he intended. Maybe Michael's reincarnation as Dean Winchester was also part of his plan, the one he had never shared with his children. Even if it was, Dean had no idea what father expected from him. Utterly aggravating. After eons of telling them what to do, he suddenly decided to wash his hands off. With a bitter taste of betrayal on his tongue, Dean muttered, "What exactly do you want me to do?" Under his breath. The angel must have assumed that the question was intended for him, because he replied with a firm, "We need you to be prepared." Dean raised his eyebrow. Prepared for what? A deep frown creased Castiel's face, and his wings twitched where they were folded behind his back. Of course, this wasn't their true form. Once the angel had taken over the vessel, inked as their entire being in flesh and blood, their wings also went through a transformation to fit their owner's current form. Human vessels and the new physical form that the wings gained were the two major factors that inspired many past artists to create the image of angels known to people to this day. However, Dean could barely make out the shape of Castiel's wings due to their intangible state. Until he found the second piece of this grace, his senses lacked the strength to actually see the wings of other angels even when they weren't actively hiding them. Only the third piece and getting the first pair of his own wings back would finally let Dean see through most angels' active concealment. "There is a war coming," Castiel said finally, "and you're..." The room door slammed open with enough force to almost tear it off its hinges. Sam rushed in with Bobby following right after, aiming shotguns at Castiel. "Get away from Dean." Dean stood there, caught completely by surprise at the explosive entrance of those two. Before he could react, Sam already crossed the room and pulled him by his arm to his side, pushing him slightly behind him, features set in a familiar bitch face at the same time because Dean didn't try to move away himself. Bobby scanned Dean up and down to make sure he was okay, but didn't linger too much on him for now. There was a stranger in the room that he had to keep his eyes on. It was such a novel feeling, that Dean allowed himself to bask in it. Sure, Sam and, to a lesser extent, Bobby had protected him in the past, but it happened in the past, and while he recalled those moments, he didn't have his real memories back then. It felt different now. Being the oldest and the strongest, it fell on Michael to protect his other siblings. Even among the Archangels, he took the protector's role all the time and no one questioned it. It simply was how it was supposed to be. The only brother who had ever shown protective inclinations towards him was Lucifer. And Michael betrayed him. Dean shoved that thought away. This was neither time nor place to think about it. "What did you do to Dean?" Sam demanded, his weapon still steadily trained on the angel. So utterly unconcerned about their threats of violence, Castiel saw no need to even move and calmly replied, "I gripped him tight and raised him from perdition." That gave both of them a pause. Their guards never went down, neither did their shotguns. Sam's jaw clenched. "Who are you?" "I am Castiel." "We figured that much," Bobby snapped. "What are you?" Castiel cocked his head to the side, and Dean almost did the same as a particularly loud voice rang throughout the angel's mental connection. Someone commanded Castiel to return. His wings spread out, ready for a flight. A lightning struck outside, illuminating the room. One, then another, and another. A shadowy silhouette of a pair of huge wings appeared on the walls behind the angel. Sam and Bobby's eyes widened, jaws going slack. Dean only thought that whoever Castiel's superior was, he was a dick by rushing him to come back by throwing a lightning bolt right after giving the command. "I am an angel of the Lord," Castiel said and vanished with a soft fluttering sound. "Wah," was all that came out of Sam's mouth. He blinked again, then turned around, scanning the room, searching for the angel. Bobby didn't fare any better. He stared at the spot where Castiel was standing and it looked like he barely held himself from lifting the carpet to check if he hid under it. Dean couldn't smother a grin at their reaction. "Yeah, pretty sure the angel is gone now." The eyes of the other two men were instantly on him. A few seconds ticked by. Dean let them gather themselves. Sam blew the air out of his lungs, pinching the bridge of his nose. "That was an angel?" Bobby asked as if needing verbal confirmation for his brain to work through that fact. Dean shrugged nonchalantly. "You've seen the wings." "They certainly did. I can't believe it," Sam murmured, his tone swirling with awe. "You were right, Dean. Angels are real." Watching his baby brother's sparkling eyes and a dopey smile spreading across his face, Dean's eyes softened as he shelved the slight sadness in his chest. Angels were far from the kind and virtuous image Sammy had of them, and soon he was going to find it out himself. Sam shifted under his gaze. "What? Nothing, I'm just, Dean suddenly chuckled. "Just remembered the way you two burst in like my knights in shining armor. It was beautiful, truly. I'm touched. Sam's bitch face was in full effect. And what are you supposed to be? A princess. A pretty damsel in distress. I might be pretty, Dean smirked, but ain't a damsel in distress. Shut up, jerk, bitch. Bobby rolled his eyes. Idiots. Underscore. Sprawled on the couch, Dean flipped the page of the thick book in his lap, skimmed the text, and clicked his tongue. This was bullshit. Exactly that he said to the others, this one's a bust. He threw the book to the other side of the couch with an almost disgusted jerk. Just a load of crap. Bobby shot him an impatient glare from behind the wall of various tomes and books piled on his desk. Sam didn't even deign his brother with a smidge of his attention. He sat on the chair, an open book in his hand as he perused it with furrowed brow in deep concentration. Right after returning from Pontiac to Bobby's place, they dived into thorough research about angels. Well, dived into research was a fancy way to say that they were lazing around and reading books. Dean was about to go crazy from boredom. And how exactly do you decide hat's crap and what's not? Bobby asked. It's said that Archangel Michael and his angels fought against the dragon in heaven and hurtled it down. Dean huffed, throwing his arms across the backrest of the couch and making himself comfortable. He never fought against any dragon as far as he could remember. There are no dragons in heaven. On second thought, maybe he did. He fought against leviathans during their banishment to purgatory. Only it happened when the universe was still in its primitive form, before heaven was even created. And not exactly dragons as humans imagined them, but if any creature could fit the bill that would be those bastards. Bobby looked at him incredulously. How do you know that? Dean paused. He said it as if he knew something about heaven. We're talking about dragons here, he generalized instead. Dragons don't exist. Yesterday we thought angels didn't exist, Sam muttered with his eyes still glued to the book. Dean shrugged in sort of agreement. He really had nothing to retort this time. And besides, I don't think the book was talking about a real dragon, Sam continued. Most likely, it was referring to Lucifer. Wait, Bobby chimed in. Lucifer. Like, the devil Lucifer. Yeah, listen to this. The Archangel Michael, the Prince of Angels and verily the eldest of all entities within the vast expanse of creation, whose wings are hued like the fiery shades of the setting sun. The Archangel Lucifer, the light bearer and the second eldest of all entities within the vast expanse of creation, whose pure white wings shine serene as the gentle glow of the moon, he read, tracing the line in the book with his finger. There are 2 more archangels, Raphael and Gabriel, and the 4 of them have the highest say in heaven. Or, had, before Lucifer rebelled against God and, through his pride, coveted the throne of God and the worship that belonged to God alone. This resulted in a mighty war in heaven. Lucifer, along with 1/3 of the angelic host, was defeated by the Archangel Michael and his angels and was cast down from heaven to earth, where he became known as Satan, adversary, as well as devil. Dean stomped on a growing displeasure at hearing the last passage. It seemed the information either got twisted or embellished by humans on purpose to vilify Lucifer, because his brother had never wanted to take over Father's place or his worship. He might have been full of pride, as they all were, but all he ever wanted was Father's love back. And with Michael turning his back on him, Lucifer must have felt driven to a corner and lashed out in the only way he thought would work. But, well, Lucifer rebelling because he felt neglected by his father didn't sound as grand and malicious as rebelling because he coveted the throne of God. That raises a sticky question, Bobby said after a while. If angels exist, does that mean the devil is real, too? Sam screwed his face like he suddenly tasted something very sour. Dean shifted. Maybe that guy, Michael will help us deal with him again, he suggested, a bit awkwardly, and then quickly tagged at the end, if both of them exist, that is. Sam didn't appear very optimistic about that prospect when he mumbled, maybe. Dean thought that if anyone would have faith in angels it would be Sam. He had been so stoked about meeting the real angel, why did he sound so skeptical now? I mean, we don't know much about angels, maybe they're just a bunch of dicks with wings, Dean said, not feeling guilty about insulting his own siblings in the slightest. Some of them deserve that. But who knows if this Michael isn't on our side? Sam sighed and finally looked up from the book. Look, he began, I'm not saying that the Archangel Michael won't fight the devil again if they truly exist and it comes to that, but considering all this lore on him, he motioned to the book in his hands. Doesn't sound like he's very kind to humans. Dean stared. Not very kind to humans. What bullshit. He saved or helped a lot of people during his life, be it Michael's or Dean's. He was currently very human himself. Of course, Sam didn't know it, but still hearing his brother say that he wasn't kind to humans upset him. Sam wasn't done though. He's known as the Wrath of Heaven, he continued, flipping a few pages of the book back. As a patron angel of righteousness and justice, the Archangel Michael can rain the fire of judgment upon those he deems sinners and unworthy of mercy and salvation. Sure, humans gave him all those intimidating titles instead of something benign like Divine Healer that Raphael received or something cute like Heaven's Messenger that Gabriel was known for, and, sure, he could do all that, but it still didn't make him a bad guy. Some lore states that Michael was behind the destruction of the ancient city of Babylon *, Bobby added, very unhelpfully. Dean couldn't hold it in anymore and blurted out, "Oh, come on. Babylon wasn't even his doing. Raphael and his squad of destruction went on the rampage back then, how come he got blamed for it? They never destroyed an entire city either, just a part where their government resided. Mostly. This still was pure slander at this point." Realizing that Sam and Bobby were staring weirdly at him now, he cleared his throat and said, "You're judging the guy before you even know him." Sam sighed in that particular way when Dean had been stupidly slow on the uptake. "I'm just saying, we've done a lot of shitty things in our lives and this Archangel Michael doesn't seem like the guy who would easily forgive and forget." There was something in his voice, his words, his body language that bothered Dean. He narrowed his eyes, shifting his senses to feel the kid's soul. "Ah, do you think of yourself as unworthy of salvation, Sammy?" The question left his mouth before he could think it through. Sam froze, before his eyes snapped up to look at his brother. Numerous emotions flashed through them and then settled on one, defensiveness. "It's easy for you to talk, Mr. My ass was touched by an angel," Bobby grumbled, concentrating on the book on his desk again. Dean frowned. "Castiel didn't touch my ass." The corner of Sam's lips twitched up. "He said he gripped you tight," he quipped, emphasizing the last three words. Dean's mouth opened, about to argue, but then closed it again. When Castiel carried him out of hell, he was only a soul, fully encompassed and caressed by his grace. It wouldn't be a surprise if he did accidentally touch his ass. Did a human soul even have an ass? Sam's smirk widened into a small grin at seeing Dean so seriously pondering this question. Bobby also snorted and shook his head in amusement. Catching himself focusing on such stupid things, Dean groaned as he flopped against the couch and threw an arm over his eyes. Being a human and an angel was starting to mess with his head. "I need some pie," he muttered. Still sporting a smile, Sam put his book on the desk and stood up. "I'll do a grocery run," he volunteered. "Don't forget the pie," Dean yelled after him as he walked out of the room to grab the car keys. "Dude," Sam shouted back, "when have I ever forgotten the pie?" Sam gripped the driving wheel so hard his knuckles went white, the same question going round and round inside his head. "Do you think of yourself as unworthy of salvation, Sammy?" The memories of his past sins kept flooding his mind like a relentless tide. The faces of those he had wronged and the lives he had shattered haunted him, each one a ghostly reminder of his failings. The weight of his actions bore down on him, a burden almost too heavy to bear. Every mistake, every moment of weakness, seemed to scream that he was beyond redemption. Not to mention the demon blood that coursed through his veins. Not even an angel would be willing to grant him forgiveness. Sam scoffed at his line of thoughts. Why was he even musing about it? It was a pointless endeavor, this self-flagellation. He had no plans to stop what he was doing with Ruby, regardless of his doubts about his actions. He was saving people, stopping demons. This had to count for something, right? "Do you think of yourself as unworthy of salvation, Sammy?" Yet, this damn question lingered, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Was there a path to redemption for someone like him? Could he ever wash away the stain of his sins? Sam's grip tightened even more, the wheel creaking under the pressure. He thought of Dean, of sacrifices his brother made for him, of the pain they both went through, and of the battles yet to come. There was no room for doubt, no time for self-pity. Noticing Ruby as soon as the Impala rolled into the grocery shop's parking lot, Sam shoved his thoughts away, climbed out, and quickly walked towards her. The demon was observing him intently, her eyes darting around almost as if she had expected someone to swoop down upon her. If Sam didn't know better, he would have assumed that Ruby was frightened. "Where have you been, Ruby?" he questioned as he approached. "I called you, but you never picked up your phone." "Yeah, about that." Ruby glanced around once again, then pulled Sam behind the corner for more privacy, and demanded, "Is it true?" "Is what true? Was it an angel who rescued Dean from hell?" Sam blinked. News spread fast. Huh. You heard. Who hasn't? Sam raised an eyebrow at her outburst. Taking a deep breath, Ruby forced herself to calm down and then explained, I went to investigate Dean's gravesite. No demon or any other creature can take a step in that place now. It's more purified than the Vatican itself. No other being I know can swing that. And, she trailed off, chewing on her lower lip. And, Sam prompted when she didn't continue. Ruby looked him dead in the eye. And I heard a gossip that Heaven's army laid siege on hell. Whoa, wait. He had a hard time wrapping his mind around this piece of information. A siege on hell, to save Dean. So, it's true, after all. Ruby whispered, face pale. After a moment, she brushed her fingers through her hair in a nervous gesture. No wonder Dean felt so strange. Sam's heart sank as dread slowly crawled under his skin. What do you mean? He asked. Something's wrong with my brother. Ruby cut herself off, her lips forming a thin line, and she knitted her brow in thought. His soul was purified, cleansed by an angel. He's untainted now. No human soul I've seen has such purity. Even newborns have some taint left from their previous lives. Okay, Sam said, trying to grasp what the demon just revealed and why she seemed so on edge. That's not a bad thing though. Ruby's eyes shifted to the side and for a moment she was silent. Dean's an enigma and that's scaring me. The confession was quiet, unsure, but Sam heard it and it was so utterly unexpected, he couldn't believe his ears. What? He asked, his tone incredulous and his lips curling up into a smile because that had to be a joke. It had to be. You're kidding, right? Ruby gave him a blank look. And the angels, they scare the holy hell out of me. They don't tolerate anyone they deem evil or sinful. They won't care if someone is being helpful, they'll smite first and will never stop to ask any questions, she continued. Angels aren't the merciful type, Sam. Watch yourself. Sam scoffed. I'm not scared of angels. You should be, the demon stated before turning around and quickly walking away. Dean was deep in his thoughts, hands moving mechanically as he worked on the rock salt rounds. The witnesses were rampaging above in Bobby's house while they hid in the man's newly built panic room. This was good. The safety of the panic room gave Bobby time to figure out what was happening. Suddenly, Dean froze in the middle of handing the next shell to Sam. Talk about the seal of the witnesses began circulating among the angels after one of the high-ranking seraphim informed the others that it had been broken. Dean frowned. He knew that it wasn't in heaven's interest to stop Lucifer from rising, at least as far as the highest order was concerned, but this was honestly ridiculous. The seal had been broken for 3 days now, and they only shared the news now. Dude, Sam complained as he grabbed the shell. Sorry. His mumbled apology earned him a worried look. You all right? Dean didn't hear the question, falling back into his own thoughts as he stared at his brother, but not quite seeing him anymore. Sam's face slowly swam out of his sight as his mind wandered back to Lucifer and the impending doomsday. He just didn't get it. Father loved humanity, he was sure of that, so why create plans to destroy it? They weren't even the reason why God left heaven, as some of his siblings believed. Michael was there when he departed, his last words shaking the foundations of his beliefs. Human souls are the purest and most amazing form of creation, God had said, his presence brightening with that intimately familiar tenderness Michael hadn't felt in millennia. I wish you all could see them as I do. A soul can conquer its destiny, Michael. Just lean closer and listen. It will tell you how. That's why he did it, ripped his own grace out and fell to the plane of mortals to be born as a human. It was the only way he could think of to get as close to humans as an angel could, despite not expecting to be bestowed with a soul of his own. He needed, to understand, to grasp his father's words and the reason for his love for humans, or he probably would have ended up going crazy like Lucifer did. Dean's eyes focused on Sam's face again, and he didn't need to lean closer to his soul to hear what it was saying. It simply screamed, loud and clear, to protect him, to keep Sammy safe. Such a pure and beautiful soul as his brother's tainted for the mere purpose of becoming the vessel for his fallen brethren. His father had wanted him to listen to the human soul, and so he listened. But this wasn't the first time he had done it, was it? Dean recalled the first time he truly listened, back when he was just a child, holding his baby brother in his arms, carrying him out of the fire, promising to keep him safe. That promise had shaped his entire existence. Every battle, every sacrifice, was for Sam. Protecting Sam was more than a familial duty, it was his sacred mission done out of pure love. Father was right. Of course, he was. Finally understanding the true meaning of God's words, Dean looked at Sam now not only with brotherly love, but with the reverence of an angel who at last grasped the unique splendor of humans his father had spoken of. Apocalypse made even less sense now though. Dean. He jolted when Sam touched his shoulder and shifted awkwardly under his and Bobby's concerned gazes. You alright? Yeah, I'm just. Dean cleared his throat, just thinking. What with all the angels suddenly fluttering around and the crazy ghosts? He absent-mindedly waved a hand up and down. Heaven and hell, and all that jazz in between. Sam eyed him as if trying to decide how much bullshit was dished his way, but decided not to push it in the end. Don't think too hard, you're gonna hurt yourself, he joked. Dean shot his brother a withering look, making his half-smile widen into a full grin. Speaking from experience, he retorted, pretty sure I can handle it. I'm not a delicate wallflower like you, Samantha. Sam shook his head, muttering, you're such a jerk. And you're such a bitch. If you two idiots done with your heart-to-heart, Bobby interrupted their bickering with a fond exasperated grumble. I have something. He tapped at the thick tome with his pencil. The symbol you saw, the brand on the ghosts, it's the mark of the witness. Witness, Sam repeated in confusion. Witness to what? The unnatural. None of them died what you'd call ordinary deaths. See, these ghosts, they were forced to rise. They woke up in agony, Bobby explained. They're like rabid dogs, and it ain't their fault. Somebody raised them on purpose and whoever it was, used a spell so powerful it left a mark, a brand on their souls. It's called the Rising of the Witnesses and it ties into an ancient prophecy. While the man talked, Dean stood up and approached his table to take a peek at the several books he had open in front of him, some stacked on top of each other. It truly was amazing how good Bobby was with research. Dean spared a few moments to admire his ability to find any kind of information in the shortest time possible. Without Bobby Singer, the country's hunter population would have probably been reduced by half, if not more. This is a sign, boys. Sam stopped next to his brother, folding his arms in front of him. A sign of what? Bobby leaned against his chair and looked up at the two siblings, expression grim. The apocalypse. An uncomfortable silence settled after that revelation. Sam glanced at Dean, then back at Bobby. As in, biblical apocalypse. The judgment day, end of the world. Yay, that's the one, the older hunter agreed. The rise of the witnesses is like a mile marker. Okay, so, what do we do now? Dean snorted. We stock up on toilet paper, he said with a clap of his hands. Two other men fixed him with incredulous stares. What? Sam sighed in that specific way when Dean was a special kind of immature. This is serious, Dean. Of course, it is. Dean exclaimed. They were going against God's plans made from time immemorial after all, but this wasn't the point. Nothing is more serious than Armageddon. That's why I'm being practical here. You're gonna thank me, believe me. A quiet, genuine laugh that tumbled out of his baby brother's mouth, even as short as it was exactly what Dean tried to achieve. He grinned in success. Before ya start your conquest to monopolize the toilet paper, boy, we need to deal with our friends up there, Bobby said, tapping his notes with his pencil again. There's a spell to send the witnesses back to rest. Should work. Should, Sam scoffed. Great, if I translated it correctly. Dean peeked at the man's notes, quickly scanning the text. Seemed correct. Don't sell yourself short, Bobby. Thanks, Bobby said, a quick smile sliding across his lips. Anyway, I think I have everything we need for the spell at the house. All right, Dean cheered with much more eagerness than the situation required. Let's do it. Sam flew up the stairs two at a time and rounded the corner, zeroing in on the closet door at the end of the hallway. He cautiously scanned the narrow surroundings. Nothing seemed out of order. He walked forward, gripping his shotgun tightly, ready to use it at any given moment. Reaching the closet without any incident, he started searching for the red hex box, pushing linens out of the way. Sam, he spun around, lifting the shotgun at the same time, his finger on the trigger, ready to press on it, and froze. It seemed like all his strength got sapped with lightning speed, because his hands started to shake and the shotgun suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She stood at the other end of the hallway, looking exactly the same as before, just as beautiful as Sam remembered her to be. A long white dress gave her a regal, ethereal air, so pure and innocent, with her long golden hair framing her pale face like a bright halo. Even the small birthmark between her eyebrows was still in its place, and Sam recalled how she hated that it was slightly off-center and how he had kissed it over and over again, telling her how perfect she was. Her name came out a little bit breathless as if someone punched it out of him, Jess. The ghost smiled. The shotgun slipped from Sam's limp fingers and clattered loudly on the floor. It was Jess. The woman he truly loved, the woman he lost, the woman he killed. Sam, Jess said softly, slowly walking forward until she was right in front of him, and, God, Sam could swear he could smell that familiar scent of strawberry and mint shampoo, which was beyond the bounds of possibility because Jess was dead, burned on the ceiling of their bedroom years ago. He knew he should grab the gun, put a salt round through her head, and bring that box to Bobby. But instead of doing any of that, he only whispered, "I'm sorry." And it was an apology, a prayer, a desperate plea. All of it and more. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are, baby," Jess replied, her voice quiet and soothing. She cupped Sam's face with her cold hands and looked into his eyes. "But that doesn't change the fact what you did to me." She was still smiling as her hands moved down and stopped on his chest. "Doesn't mean that it wasn't your fault." Sam gasped when one of her petite hands pierced his skin, slender fingers ripping into his flesh and sending waves of pain throughout his body. The ghost's smile vanished and her expression twisted into a snarl. "Your sorry doesn't give me back my life, Sam," she yelled, pushing her hand further. And with the sudden clarity, Sam realized that she was right, that he agreed with her wholeheartedly, that even if he could do something, he wouldn't. He had screwed up once and Jess, the love of his life, had paid the price. He had screwed up again and Dean got torn to shreds by hellhounds and dragged to hell, where he was tortured for 40 years. They were his sins. He deserved this, all of it. Blackness threatened to overtake his consciousness when someone calling his name in the distance reached his ears. Sam. Dean skidded into the hallway, almost crashing into the opposite wall. As soon as his frantic gaze landed on his brother and Jess, his eyes widened. "Shit, hold on, Sammy," he cried out, already sprinting towards the two. Once he was at an angle where he could shoot his shotgun without hitting Sam, he didn't waver in the slightest. The ghost dispersed. Sam breathed in a painful gulp of air before collapsing where he stood. "Sam." Dean kneeled next to him, quickly inspecting the wound on Sam's chest. It looked nasty, but not life-threatening. He brushed a stray hair off his brother's face to see his eyes, then grabbed his head with both hands. "Sammy, you hear me?" "I'm sorry, Dean," not what Dean had expected to hear, and he knitted his brow in confusion. "Dude, it's not your fault that the ghost jumped you." "No, not that." Sam fervently shook his head and gripped Dean's jacket, seemingly trying to shake him and make him understand what he tried to say. "You went to hell for me, I'm sorry." Hey, look at me, Sam." Dean tapped his brother's cheek to force him to look at him, and once he did, Dean caught the gaze of his regretful, hazel eyes and held it. "That was my decision, you hear me? You can't be responsible for other people's decisions. But if you want forgiveness, I forgive you, Sammy. For everything, and my word on this matter carries a lot of weight. Michael wasn't called a patron angel of righteousness and justice for nothing. As the commander of the fire of judgment, he reserved the right to judge sinners, to either punish or forgive them." A faint smile tugged at Dean's lips as he made a quick motion of brushing his thumb across Sam's forehead, letting a speck of his grace seep into him as a part of this sacred ritual. It dropped onto his wounded soul, instantly cleansing and mending the tiny area around it. It wouldn't hold for long, too meager for too big corruption, but it was all he could do for now. Sensing a presence nearby, Dean snapped his attention to it. Jess stood a few feet away, looking at him with obvious confusion. She must have felt it, the power of an angel. Molten gold flickered in Dean's green irises as he let his grace slide from where he hid it behind his soul, let it flare up as much as possible, let its edges sharpen like a sword ready to cut the enemy down. Jess' eyes widened. At the next moment, she was gone. Good call. Despite being such a small part of his true essence, it contained enough power to at least injure a simple ghost if he so wished, though he would have done it only as a last resort. Dean urged his grace to return to its hiding spot while he moved so that he could haul his little brother's gigantic frame up from the floor. "Come on, kiddo, snap out of it," he said. "We need to help Bobby put these poor souls to rest." "Yeah, all right," Sam muttered, too exhausted to argue. Dean simply didn't realize what he had done, what he was, the freak with demon blood in his veins, and how truly unworthy he was of his forgiveness. Dean woke up with a start. Something slid from his lap, and his hand shot out on instinct to catch it. He lay there then, trying to figure out what had woken him up and when he had fallen asleep in the first place. Going by the house shrouded in darkness, it was still the middle of the night. The only dim light came from the guard lamp outside. It poured through the kitchen and porch windows and illuminated the room with an eerie aura. Realizing that he was lying on the couch in Bobby's study where Sam was supposed to be sleeping instead, he willed his brain to remember how he ended up here. The last thing he recalled was browsing the internet on Sam's laptop, searching for a sign of his grace. He actually found a promising lead and must have dozed off soon after. Dean glanced at his lap and, sure thing, Sam's laptop was something that almost slid off. Thank goodness, he caught it. But then again, why no one removed it after he had fallen ASL? Wait, something wasn't right here. He looked around, puzzled. His senses picked on some kind of weirdness permeating the surroundings, but he couldn't quite make out what exactly was amiss. Dean peeked over the door frame into the kitchen and saw Castiel leaning against the cupboard, waiting. He could also make out the faint shape of his wings as he kept moving and rustling them as if finding them uncomfortable in any position. Dean dropped his head back on the pillow with a sigh. A dream, or, more likely, a dream projection created by Castiel, a space and time between dream and reality. At least it wasn't a nightmare drowned in blood, soaked in hell's stench, and full of screams of the damned. His human consciousness liked to take over and had fun with him while he slept. Sleeping was great, but he surely wasn't going to miss it once he wouldn't need to do it anymore. With a sigh, Dean heaved himself up and walked into the kitchen. Castiel, he greeted the younger angel. Excellent job with the witnesses. Thanks. Dean eyed the angel, unable to stop a surge of worry at the sight. He seemed even more of a mess than the last time they met. From what he picked up out of angelic chatter, Castiel was one of the leading captains here on Earth and he definitely must have gone through some battles. Subtly glancing at his wings, Dean noticed one of them visibly shudder before Castiel's stoic expression scrunching up. Plunging into the depths of hell was dangerous, even for an angel. Alistair held Dean almost at the very bottom, and while most demons couldn't do much to angels, their numbers exceeded the forces of heaven and easily overwhelmed them. Not to mention, former angels dwelled among demons, twisted and tainted by corruption, and posed the greatest threat even on their own. Hell itself rejected divine beings by default. Castiel must have sustained numerous injuries from the siege and then his trip to the bottom, but he also took Dean's taint into himself, cleansing his soul until it was sparkling and squeaky clean like a brand new. Now he was going through an uncomfortable and quite often painful ordeal of purifying his grace. While in this state, he also had to participate in battles against demons and corrupted angels for the seals. Dean's heart gave a guilty lurch. This little sibling of his didn't even have to cleanse his soul. He doubted that his superior ordered him to do it. He would bet his wings that he was ordered not to do it. After all, they needed Dean Winchester pliant and susceptible for persuasions to say yes once the right time had arrived. Yet, Castiel did it out of his own violation despite all that. You don't look so hot, Dean said after catching a slight shudder running through the angel's wing again. I do not feel heat or coldness, Castiel deadpanned. Dean snorted, an amused smile spreading across his face despite his more somber mood, and he clarified, no, I mean that you look tired. Castiel tilted his head slightly to the side and squinted, curious and analyzing. You are worried about me, he observed. A frown settled on his features like he didn't know what to do with this information. Of course, I am, Dean replied immediately. Realizing it, he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I mean, you saved me from hell, and then you yelled at me until my ears started bleeding. I yelled right back at you, and it's like, friendly jabs in the human world, you know. So, it makes us buddies now, he rambled nonsense, ignoring how Castiel appeared more and more confused. Anyway, speaking of hell, I don't think I've said this yet. He looked straight into the angel's eyes, completely sincere. Thank you. Castiel blinked, seemingly surprised by such genuine gratitude, clearly not expecting it. I was merely fulfilling my duty, he said, but a tiny, barely noticeable upward curve on his lips showed how truly pleased he felt. But you are welcome. Dean flashed a grin, leaned against the cupboard next to the younger angel, and after a short companionable silence spoke, Bobby says we're dealing with the apocalypse. Yes, Castiel confirmed. That is why we are here, walking among you for the first time in 2,000 years. When he didn't hear any comment, he continued, the rising of the witnesses is one of the 66 seals. Those seals are being broken by Lilith. I bet nothing good will come if all those seals break. There was a brief pause before Castiel shifted so that they were face to face again. Once the last seal breaks, Lucifer will walk free. His voice was even lower than usual, grimmer. Not surprising. The war in heaven was brutal enough, no angel wanted to deal with Lucifer again. Or, well, any angel with common sense and survival instinct. And angels are here to stop this from happening. Castiel nodded. I guess this seal was broken, Dean mused. How are the others doing? He heard the reports, of course, but he wanted to see how this young angel would answer him. Some we will save, some we will lose. Castiel turned his head to the side, as if he couldn't look Dean in the eyes any longer, and glared at nothing in particular. We are trying, but our numbers are not unlimited. How many of you are down here? Castiel suddenly deflated, looking even wearier. His shoulders sagged and his wings drooped. Not enough, he admitted quietly. Dean's lips twitched down in a small frown. Michael had been gone for centuries. Granted, he had left half of his grace up there to conceal his absence, but he had never planned to stay away for so long. The lower circles of his siblings wouldn't have noticed, but Raphael definitely should have. It would be in his best interest to stall or put everything on hold until Michael was found. But Apocalypse was on its way, despite one of the main actors unaccounted for. This made no sense whatsoever. It meant that Raphael either didn't know that Michael was gone, and the whole host was in for a big nasty surprise, or his fellow Archangel had plans to somehow win against Lucifer by himself. Raphael knew his capabilities, he was not an idiot. He wasn't strong enough to fight his older brother. He had to have something, some kind of ace up his sleeve. Like half of Michael's grace within arm's reach. Unprotected, pure grace would give him the edge he needed against Lucifer or anyone else, for that matter. Dean paled at the thought. Raphael wouldn't dare to do it, would he? It was just an assumption. He wouldn't steal half of his older brother's life essence just to fulfill some stupid prophecy, right? No matter how he denied it, the possibility of his fellow Archangel's betrayal stung more than a knife through his heart ever could. Dean, a feather-light touch on his forehead and Castiel's grace carefully wrapping around him jolted Dean out of his bubbling panic and his eyes snapped back to the angel's face. A face that was an inch or so from his own. Talk about an eye comprehension of personal space. Dude, he grumbled, stepping back. You need not fear, Castiel said, observing him closely. We shall prevail. Yeah, of one thing, Dean was quite sure now, Castiel genuinely tried to stop the apocalypse. He didn't know about God's plan or how heaven's highest order faked their attempts. This little sibling of his was so very naive and pure. And an idiot, a naive idiot that Dean moved into his, must protect, list. He had already carried Castiel's protection brand on his soul and was in his debt for saving him. As the elder brother, he might as well return the gesture in kind. Despite angels calling each other siblings, in reality, a lot of them weren't that close. They loved each other, they did, but there were just too many of them and they were too militaristic to have anything resembling a true family as a whole. It was inevitable that some angels grouped up into smaller units with those they felt closest to. Then rebellion came and passed. Everyone was on edge after the battle. It got worse after Lucifer's imprisonment in the cage, with brothers and sisters walking around each other as if expecting a stab to the back the moment they turned around. Those smaller units became frowned upon at first and a complete taboo after God left heaven. It bred emotions they weren't supposed to have, or so angels justified, punishing those who disobeyed. Michael and Lucifer had always been such a unit from the moment they came into existence. Later, they eagerly accepted Raphael and Gabriel, and for a long while, the four of them looked out for each other. Until they gradually stopped, even before the rebellion. Michael's hard-headedness, Lucifer's anger, Raphael's aloofness, Gabriel's avoidance, everyone contributed to ripping it apart. Dean's old family unit was long gone now, but it didn't mean he couldn't build a new one. He already had Sam and Bobby, nevertheless, he wasn't against a new addition. We should go for a beer one day. You, me, Sam, Bobby. It'd be nice. A soft smile followed his words. Of course, his intentions went over Castiel's head, his brow furrowing in a human's or confusing way. I do not require an alcoholic substance. Dean barked out a startled laugh. If you talk like that, you certainly do, he stated as a matter of fact. A set of specific orders rang out throughout the angelic mental communication, and Castiel's wings primed for a flight. I'm needed elsewhere, and with that, he disappeared. Dean sighed. He missed his wings. The next time Dean woke up, it was slow and lazy. Such a good sleep. Must have been Castiel's doing, he thought, stifling a yawn. Blindly, he patted around his lap. When he didn't feel Sam's laptop anywhere on him, he glanced around the room. The laptop was sitting safely on Bobby's desk. Sam must have moved it there after Dean dozed off. The house was still dark, though not as much as in Castiel's dream projection. He still felt too tired to get up just yet. Staring at the shadows on the ceiling, he couldn't help but frown. If Raphael truly planned to absorb his grace, Dean needed to pick up speed in the search for its pieces. The assimilation of other angels' grace into your own was feasible, though it carried a lot of hidden dangers and couldn't be done all willy-nilly. If someone wasn't strong enough to suppress the essence of an angel they tried to absorb, couldn't find the seams that held the grace together and dismantle it fast enough, they risked being eaten by that grace instead and losing their mind. Half of Michael's grace wasn't something Raphael would risk swallowing before making enough preparations. At least, Dean hoped he wouldn't do it soon. If he had planned to do it at all. He still wanted to believe that his brother didn't plan to betray him like that. Dean himself couldn't take in that half at the current moment either. His vessel wouldn't be able to survive. Or, it shouldn't. That was what happened with fallen angels who were reborn as humans after they had taken their grace back into their physical bodies. But they never had souls in them, unlike him. His body contained a soul, like those humans that said, yes, to angels. Would that change anything? Dean didn't know, and he didn't want to gamble his true vessel like that. Especially when he experienced excruciating pain after absorbing the first piece. Taking his grace back piece by piece lessened the burden on his vessel and slowly saturated it with his essence until it reached capacity to absorb the remaining half left in heaven without exploding. That was why he needed to collect the other 4 pieces first. The lead he found earlier was worth checking out. He wondered how he should explain it to Sam without making him even more suspicious. Dean glanced around the room again. Where was that kid anyway? Opening his senses, he scanned the surroundings. He found Bobby on the 2nd floor in his room and Sam outside on the porch. Dean pushed blanked off, which probably Sam put on him, because he didn't remember doing it himself, and stood up. Padding to the porch window, he peeked outside. It was fairly dark, but he could make out a lone figure sitting on the porch stairs. He went to the kitchen next and put some water to boil. After finding his shoes under the couch, he made 2 mugs of coffee and brought them both outside. The wooden floor of the porch creaked quietly under his weight. Sam never glanced back to see who was coming from behind, his eyes never moving away from the distant horizon. It was early in the morning. On one side, the sky was the dark blue and purple of twilight. On another, the sun bloomed beyond the horizon, orange and golden petals bright amid the rich blue. Night chill still lingered in the air, but the daybreak was quickly bringing glimmers of warmth with it. "Sammy," Dean called. His heart ached at the haunted hazel eyes that met his gaze. He didn't say anything else but instead offered the coffee. Sam took it with a soft, "Thanks." Sitting here for who knew how long, his hands must have been cold by now. He wrapped his fingers around the mug, not bothered by its still too hot surface. Dean sat down too, not too close to be crowding Sam's personal space, but enough that their shoulders brushed over each other. "Have you slept?" he asked carefully. Sam stiffened and his hold on the mug tightened. A handful of emotions flashed through his features before the walls of defenses slammed firmly into place. "I'm fine," he said, his voice tight. Dean observed him, wanting nothing more than to wipe that expression clear off of his face, to lighten his burden, to give this kid what he truly deserved. He wanted to ask Sam how he felt, how he could help. The urge to shake Sam and scream at him until he believed that none of it was his fault, that just wasn't his sin to carry, that everything that had happened to them was a deliberate plan to steer Winchesters towards this exact point. Yet, Dean said nothing. Words were useless in this situation, because Sam was Winchester through and through, and the Winchesters never shared their aches and pains. They were always fine, and even when the weight of the world threatened to crush them, the Winchesters never agreed to divide it with the others. So, Dean stayed silent. He shifted his eyes away from his baby brother and onto the horizon, taking a few sips of his coffee. Slowly, gradually, without anyone pressuring him to talk, the tension bled out of Sam's shoulders, his stiff pose relaxed, and his defense started to crack, to unravel. Minutes ticked away as they just sat there on Bobby's porch in comfortable silence, surrounded by fresh morning air and coffee scent. Dean's patience paid off when eventually Sam rubbed at his face tiredly, then brushed his fingers through his hair. I didn't expect to see her," he confessed, a bit reluctant, but at least he was talking about it now. "Those spirits weren't in their right mind, Sam." I know," he hurriedly said before sighing. "Doesn't mean that what she said isn't true." Sam, listen, God, I hope she's safe northwest, his brother interrupted, and Dean let him. I hope she's up there, you know, in heaven. Hell and demons exist, so if angels exist, heaven should be real too, right? Sam stared at him with pleading eyes, waiting for confirmation, and Dean's chest swelled with the need to comfort. Heaven is real, he said, then hesitated, but pushed through regardless, but the witnesses, they don't return to heaven. Sam's eyes widened and his face drained of all the blood. What? He stammered out, his voice full of pure horror. The souls that are raised as witnesses are marked by the spell, by the brand we saw, remember? They don't go back to heaven, instead, they get reborn and move through the reincarnation cycles until their souls are cleansed from any residue of that spell, Dean explained. A small smile tugged the corner of his lips up as he added, after 9 months, Jess will be screaming her newborn's lungs out somewhere in this world. Sam narrowed his eyes. How do you know that? Castiel told me, he lied without batting an eye. He visited me in the dreams. A scowl etched onto Sam's features as he relaxed a tiny bit and stared at the coffee in his hands, at the curling steam rising from it. That's a good thing, right? He asked after a moment. The reincarnation. Well, life is not always only smiles and the sunshine, more often than not, it sucks, Dean stated honestly. But humans have a lot of good things too. Classic cars, showers, Metallica, beer, sex. He smiled an easy grin as he listed all that before his expression softened into a fond look. Family. The way Dean said it while looking at him, with so much love and devotion, made Sam duck his head down, looking awkward and slightly embarrassed, a bit of red dusting his cheeks. Jess will be fine, Dean assured. And this apocalypse will not interfere with her new life, because we're gonna stop it. He lifted his coffee mug. It wasn't as cool as a beer, but it would do. Together. Sam's lips curled into a genuine smile. He brought forward his mug and clinked it into Dean's. Together. Dean was not even halfway to a full awareness from his uneasy, nightmare-induced sleep when his instincts screamed at him. Someone not Sam was inside the room. His hand slid under the pillow, fingers curling around the handle of his trusty hunting knife. On the next moment, he pulled it out, twisting around as he did, and thrust it at the enemy, his senses opening up for better precision. It picked on the already familiar presence at the same time as Dean saw the familiar face. He tried to stop the attack, but only managed to jerk his hand to the side before his leg got tangled in the bed sheets. His surprised saws got cut short as he tumbled out of the bed with a yelp. Hello, Dean. Dean didn't even bother to stand up. He lay there with his back against the carpet, feeling miserable. His pride already got a hit. Imagine the oldest and most powerful Archangel falling out of his bed. He groaned at the thought, scrubbing his hands down his face with a curse under his breath. Damn it, Castiel. At least, the angel had the decency to appear slightly guilty. My apologies, he said. His 2 sets of wings shifted as Castiel rearranged their position. After a moment, he asked, what were you dreaming about? Dean stiffened, lifting his hand off his face to shoot him a glare. That was none of anyone's business. His human consciousness playing with him was his problem. Castiel had already seen him at his lowest, and Dean didn't dare to even imagine what this young seraph would think if he knew his true identity. He would find out eventually, and who knew how he would react, but it wasn't here or now. What do you want? Dean asked, his tone harsher than he intended, but his hackles were up now and there was no point in trying to smooth it out. You have to stop it. Stop what? Castiel didn't elaborate. Instead, he reached down toward Dean's forehead. Dean felt the seraph's grace bursting out, flooding the room and enveloping him in a gentle, careful hold. His stomach dropped because it meant something was about to happen. Whoa, why? Castiel's fingers touched his forehead before he could finish. There was a split-second feeling of displacement, and then Dean plopped down on a hard wooden bench, his leather jacket landing on top of his lap. Castiel's grace retreated, leaving him God knows where. Somewhere outside, in the middle of an unfamiliar town, with a passing cop eyeing him suspiciously. Awesome, Dean muttered as he looked around, trying to see anything specific that would help to identify the location. Something was off with this town, but he couldn't quite put a finger on what was amiss. He fumbled through the pockets of his jacket and pulled out his phone. No reception. Double awesome. Also, very weird. There was a diner across the street. Dean threw the phone back into the pocket, pushed himself off the bench, and walked to that diner to get his bearings. The moment he entered, his eyes immediately fell on the person sitting at the counter and reading a newspaper. Michael had only one true vessel, the one he was occupying right now, but there were other humans, other vessels who could hold his power for a short time in case of emergency. He knew all of his past and future potential vessels, their names and dates of births imprinted into his memory the same way as the list of prophets was. Recognizing one of those potential vessels was as easy as breathing. Time travel. A freaking angelic DeLorean. You must be kidding me, Dean groaned as he all but collapsed into a free seat right next to one John Winchester. Are you okay, buddy? Dean turned to look at his dad who was staring at him, his curious expression tinged with a bit of concern. His very young human dad. Yeah, just, he trailed off, lifting his hand to massage his nose bridge. Got pranked. Sounds tough, John commented. Younger sibling, Dean replied in an annoyed grumble. Such a pain in the ass. A soft smile spread across Winchester's face before he looked to the other side and waved to get the attention of the barista. Hey, can we get coffee here? Dean couldn't suppress a smile of his own when the smell of coffee filled his nostrils. Thanks, man, he said before taking a sip. I really needed this. You're welcome, John answered, going back to reading the newspaper. Dean glanced at it, quickly zeroing in on the date. April 30, 1973. And just like that, he could guess pretty well what he was supposed to be stopping. All these important dates were already predetermined from the beginning of time, the moment God thought that the apocalypse would be a cool experience for his children. They were weaved into the very existence of time itself, thus, like a little obedient bitch, it would twist, curve, bend, and do anything to make it happen. It was one thing to try and derail one of these upcoming destined events, like the apocalypse, yet an absolutely different ordeal once they had already happened. It was nearly impossible to change them then. And even if someone managed to do it, dire consequences would follow their actions. The past couldn't be changed all willy-nilly. Unless they were ready to carry the responsibility of a complete collapse of the known future, no one should be meddling with the flow of time. Mary Winchester's deal with Azazel was one of these fixed points in history. Dean was positive that none of the angels were ready to destroy their current reality, so why the hell Castiel dropped him here with the orders to do exactly that? This situation stunk. Dean wanted nothing to do with it. Despite his reluctance, he begrudgingly slinked after his dad when John left the diner. As he rounded the corner, he almost bumped into Castiel, who popped out of nowhere. As this, Dean motioned at the world around them, his frustration over the stupidity of his siblings peaking, your revenge for me not being in a sharing mood over my dreams. The angel's brow furrowed. No, he replied, I told you, you have to stop it. Dean scoffed. Watch Back to the Future, man. Is changing the past really a good idea? Wouldn't it, I don't know, destroy the future we know? He pinned the angel with a hard, suspicious glare. Is that the plan you angels are cooking? No, it's, Castiel cut his denial off, jaw tightening. Dean waited, but got no explanation. Castiel was ordered not to tell him anything then. Sending him to stop something unstoppable. And with no information whatsoever on top of that. What a bunch of dicks, seriously. Besides, Dean continued, if this thing is so important that you can bend the time, why can't you stop it yourself? Castiel opened his mouth, but then closed it again. Dean raised an eyebrow, curious to hear the answer. As a deep scowl crossed the angel's face and he turned his eyes away from Dean, the latter smirked. What a cute little sibling who didn't know how to lie. It was downright endearing. I cannot interfere, Castiel finally declared in a no-nonsense tone. This is your mission. Dean rolled his eyes, not impressed. Right, they glared at each other for a moment. Well, whatever, Dean said cheerily, clapping Castiel over his shoulder as he brushed past him. I'm gonna stop it, whatever that is. They never told him what he was supposed to be stopping. Dean snorted. Idiots, leaving such a loophole for him to use. Now, he only needed to find something to stop. In a car lot of a dealership, his dad was excitedly petting some kind of dull yellow-colored chubby monstrosity of a van. Dean froze mid-step, all thoughts screeching to a halt. The terrifying image of him and Sam sitting in the back seats of that thing instantly flashed before his eyes. A shiver ran down his spine. Oh, hell no, he muttered under his breath, changing direction without a second thought. That he was stopping, at all costs. Dean crossed the street and quickly glanced over the lot as he approached John. One car stood out above the others, and he smiled, fondness curling around his eyes. Even with the layer of dust coating her black sleek form, his baby was as gorgeous as ever. How could his dad pass her for that horrendous van was beyond him. You're not planning to let your future kids ride in that thing, are you? Dean asked as he leaned on baby. John swiveled around startled. Well, I promised someone, he trailed off before squinting in suspicion. Are you following me? Nah, I was just passing by. Let me repay the favor for that cup of coffee earlier. Dean tapped the Impala's hood. This is the car you want. Not waiting for a reply, he pushed himself off the car and expertly hefted the hood up. Oh, yeah, you know something about cars? John asked curiously, already peeking over the man's shoulder. My dad taught me everything I know. And this is a great car. Dean flashed a grin. I can guarantee that you won't regret buying it. Half an hour later Dean was lounging on the street bench with his arms dropped across the backrest frame, observing John Winchester maneuvering Impala out of the parking lot and speeding up along the street before it rounded a corner and disappeared out of view. Dean made no move to follow. Instead, he heaved a heavy sigh of relief, closed his eyes for a moment, and said, thank God, the crisis had been averted. He would be lying to himself if he said he didn't want to follow John. He did, very much so. He wanted to stop his mother's deal with Azazel, to stop Azazel from corrupting Sam and from killing his mom, to stop his dad from becoming a hunter, to give Sammy a chance at normal life as a lawyer with Jess and kids and white picket fence. He wanted all that and more, but no matter what he did, no matter how much he banged his head against the wall, the outcome would always be the same. So, he would rather not see his dad and mom, happy and alive, lest he decided to be stupid and try anyway. Maybe if he was only Dean and didn't have his original memories of Michael, he would do it. Tried to change it. No, there was no doubt that he would do it. And he would have ended up crushed, because he would have failed. It would work in heaven's favor if Dean Winchester was broken, guilt-ridden, and compliant once he had to say yes and relinquish his rights to his body. And seeing his mom making a deal with the demon and consequently selling his brother to the bastard, would certainly hit him hard. Not that it mattered now. He couldn't say yes to himself anyway. Obviously, the angels didn't know that. And Dean had no intention to reveal it anytime soon if he could help it. As he was thinking, he absent-mindedly looked around. What should he do until Castiel came to pick him up? The advertisement column caught his attention. Or more precisely, one specific poster. Dean's mouth stretched into a huge grin. The douchebag ordering Castiel around wanted to crush his confidence, to break anything that was left of Dean Winchester after the hell. Bad news for the douche, he was messing with the wrong person. Dean jumped to his feet, full of eagerness. He glanced at the poster again, and his grin widened even more. LED Zeppelin, Fry, May 4 to 8 p.m. Atlanta Stadium, get your tickets now. This will be awesome, Dean hung out around Lawrence for a few days doing nothing in particular, but painting a pretty decent picture of the hunter trying to figure out the hunt. He was cut off from the angelic mental connection while in the past, but judging by the lack of angels popping in, he was pretty confident that he had fooled them. Which was weird. Angels should have known what happened in the past, should have known that Dean wouldn't cooperate with their scheme. They left him alone anyway. Well, he certainly wouldn't complain about it. Dean got excited more and more as the date of the concert drew closer. A chance to see one of his favorite bands in live performance certainly didn't come often, not in his life. He hyped himself up till he practically glowed with excitement. A day before the concert, he jumped into the stolen car and put Lawrence in his rearview mirror. Dean was halfway to Atlanta when night fell. A blackness, thick as velvet, engulfed the world and it shrunk to the boundary of the car's headlights, rolling down the road. Quiet music filled the inside of the car, like waves filling holes in beach sand. The sound floated from the radio and weaved around him, lulling him into a peaceful state without any thoughts in his head. There was only music, the road, and his fingers drumming on the wheel along the rhythm. Dean always loved driving, traveling the roads like endless rivers of tarmac stretching into the horizon in front and behind as far as the eye could see or disappearing into the forest only a few meters ahead while no one could tell where it might take weary travelers to. He was enjoying this too. What are you doing, Dean? Dean almost jumped out of his skin at the unexpected voice. The car swerved dangerously and careened onto the dirt shoulder, but he corrected it quickly and expertly. His heart was still pounding a mile a minute as he glanced at Castiel, sitting innocently in the passenger's seat and staring at him, his vessel's deep blue eyes boring straight into his soul. Jesus, Castiel, Dean exclaimed before taking a deep breath and letting it out, calming himself. You want to scare me to death. I do not wish you harm. Yeah, well, tell that to my heart, Dean grumbled. He shot a glance at the angel again when he felt his intense gaze prickling on his skin. "What's up, buddy? What are you doing, Dean?" Castiel repeated. "What am I doing?" Dean beamed. "I'm going to the Led Zeppelin's concert, of course." The angel was still staring, with his brow furrowed this time. His wings were restless behind him, shifting, spreading out, then folding again. He looked so utterly lost, Dean felt a pang of guilt. He shooed it away. "Hey, I did what you asked me to," he stated confidently. "I stopped it." Castiel seemed even more puzzled. "You did?" "Yeah," Dean chuckled. "Imagine me and Sammy growing in that big-ass, ugly van. Not happening. Ever." That, Castiel paused, the end continued a bit more hesitantly, "was not what you had to stop." "Seriously? Ah, well, tough luck." The angel stared, palpable confusion rolling off of him in waves. After a few minutes, he turned forward and watched the road stretching in front of the car, his pose as stiff as a board. The music filled the air once more as the two of them traveled in silence. Thinking about the concert tomorrow, Dean unconsciously grinned. "You are in a good mood," Castiel commented. Dean let out a short, happy laugh. "It's Led Zeppelin, man. Led Zeppelin." Another few minutes passed in silence. A soft sigh left Castiel's lips. "I am sorry, Dean." "Sorry? What for?" Already familiar grace filled the car and wrapped around him. Dean knew all too well what it meant. "Wait," he shouted, only to feel fingers touching his forehead. Another brief feeling of displacement and he was met with a view of the empty motel room instead of the stretching road ahead. He blinked, swept his hand across his face before letting it drop back to his side. Still the motel room. "Son of a bitch, you misunderstood your mission." Dean turned around. Castiel stood at the window, looking outside. Headlights of a passing car lit his face for a moment, making his pensive expression appear gloomier. "Well, my apologies for failing your friggin' mission," Dean snarked, feeling miffed. He was looking forward to that concert, damn it. Castiel showed no reaction to his sarcasm. "You couldn't have stopped it anyway," he said quietly. "Destiny cannot be changed." "Ha," Dean scoffed. He did wonder why Castiel told him that. Wasn't he under orders not to tell him anything? Then it's a good thing I didn't try to stop it, huh? "You needed to learn the truth," the angel said, finally turning to look at Dean. "The truth about your brother. Why don't you just tell me then?" "To save your father's life, your mother made a deal with Azazel, permitting him to enter her home. Once there, he fed his blood to your brother." Castiel paused, but Dean stayed silent. "You have to understand, Azazel was not a common demon." Dean let out a snort. "Of course, he wasn't. He was once an angel, after all. A chief of Grigori who followed Lucifer when the latter was cast out of heaven. Eventually, corruption twisted and perverted the beautiful divine being into a macabre parody of itself, but his loyalty to the fallen Archangel never died. The blood also wasn't the only thing he fed to all those human babies. He fed them a drop of his corrupted grace." "Yeah, I realize that," Dean replied. A touch of sympathy passed Castiel's features as if Dean realized nothing. "We know what Azazel did to your brother, but we don't know why, or what his endgame is. He went to great lengths to cover that up." Castiel shifted, his wings making a sharp twitch. "Your brother is headed down a dangerous road, Dean, and we are not sure where it leads. You need to stop it. Or we will." Dean's patience snapped. He already felt aggrieved because some douchebag decided to throw him into the past to do the impossible, and now they wanted to threaten him by threatening Sam. He straightened up, drawing himself up to his full height, keeping his grace under tight control. It still twirled and blazed like a raging fire, spreading warmth across his chest. In a few strides, Dean was right in front of the angel, seemingly looming over him, eyes flashing in his fury. Castiel didn't move away, didn't even look away, his expression didn't change a bit, but his wings folded closer to his body, almost as if yielding to someone stronger. "Nobody threatens my brother," Dean said, low and menacing. "Not even the angels." For a few moments, they stood like that, face to face, eyes locked in mutual stare down. Castiel was the first to break the silence with a soft, 425 Waterman. An address. Probably, Sam's current location. Because they wanted him to see what Sam was turning into. As if it didn't align with their plan all along. These manipulative bastards. This reminded him of that moment a long time ago when Father told Michael to watch what Lucifer had become after his banishment from heaven before he ordered him to throw his brother into the cage. The similarity made him sick. With a sneer, Dean turned around to grab his gun from the bed. At the sound of fluttering wings, he glanced over his shoulder to see Castiel gone. He pushed his gun behind his back, grabbed Impala's keys, and left the motel. The first thing Dean noticed as he drove into the yard of the address Castiel gave him was an expensive car parked next to some shabby building with high windows and a rusty aluminum roof. Probably some not yet completely abandoned warehouse. He parked farther away from the exit to not alert those inside. Climbing out of the Impala, he swept the area with his senses, noting Sam's presence with two demons next to him. With the last measuring glance around, Dean jogged towards the door. Putting his hand on the rusty metal, he muffled the inevitable creaking with his powers and carefully pushed the door open just enough for him to slip inside. Nobody noticed him entering, neither Sam nor Ruby or the demon, bound to the chair. Sam oozed with power, dark, savage, and destructive. It thrummed underneath his skin with the fresh dose of the demon blood pumping through his veins. Every demon carried a bit of hell with them. The vile, repulsive essence that slivered in between those broken, mangled remains of what once was a human soul. And that essence was exactly what Sam filtered out from the demon blood. It seeped into his flesh and bones, into every cell and molecule, until it settled down onto his soul, congregating around the spot where the fragment of Azazel's corrupted grace lay lodged into its surface like a hook. It split and scarred the outer layer of the soul, luring all the rot and taint to stuff itself in. Of course, the amount of hell's essence wasn't enough to tear his soul apart, to turn Sam into a real demon, but it sure was more than enough to weaken it and amplify the piece of corrupted angel's grace instead. Its tainted state allowed a pure human like Sam to borrow its powers, so that was what he did, channeled the power of the grace to smite demons. Only, it hadn't been strengthened enough to kill them. Yet, it had to be Sam, the one who would kill Lilith and break the last seal on Lucifer's prison. Dean knew that. He was ready to give his all to stop it, because Sam didn't deserve to be a mere pawn in God's plan, didn't deserve to be jerked around by angels and demons alike. But Lucifer was also his brother and he didn't deserve to be betrayed by his older brother the moment he needed him the most, didn't deserve to be locked away for eternity. Dean felt so lost. It didn't help that this situation reminded him so much of what happened back then. The sneaking around, the secrecy, the lies. Going behind his back. After living as a human and experiencing emotions that the human soul could offer, Dean could recall seeing the signs, the changes in Lucifer's behavior, the gradual spiraling downwards until that moment when they clashed their swords, their wings flaring aggressively and their powers colliding under the blanket of the storm. It was the one and only time when heaven had been so ominous and unwelcoming, with siblings killing siblings under its darkened sky. And Sam headed down the same path. Eventually, they would clash and, while their fight wouldn't be on such a grand scale as the fight between Michael and Lucifer, it would still echo that ancient conflict. Dean and Sam were true vessels for Michael and Lucifer respectively. No wonder it was like history wanted to repeat itself. And he couldn't go through that. Not again. Dean leaned heavily to the side until his shoulder touched the wall and rubbed his eyes with his index and thumb, then pressed, making spots appear against the black of his vision. He opened them again just in time to see his brother turning around, supportive arms around the previously possessed man. Sam froze when he saw Dean, eyes widening, and blurted out his name of sheer surprise, Dean. He carefully lowered the man down, so that he could lift his arms in a placating gesture. Dean, this is, he trailed off, clearly not knowing what to say. Just hold on, okay. Let me explain. Dean stayed silent, watching Sam. There was fear etched on his young features now. Some hurt, too, a little bit of guilt. But also, pride and self-righteousness. He saw Sam's mouth move, but he didn't hear his words, his mind busy with overlapping Sam with Lucifer. Lucifer's expression was so hurt, yet still so prideful and self-righteous the moment Michael banished him from heaven. And then, his grace radiated pain and betrayal when he eventually threw him into the cage. Dean sucked in a breath despite the sudden tightness in his throat. Cracks spread across his chest as if they were real, as if they could split open his ribs and pull out his heart to show the world all those ugly scars of guilt sitting like a blight on its surface. He didn't want to think about it, denied himself thinking about it until now, but he would have to choose in the end, wouldn't he? To choose which brother he would side with, which one he would save. Dean. Sam stared at him, weary, confused, and maybe a little bit hopeful that his older brother would understand, and Dean couldn't stay here. Couldn't look Sam in the eyes. Not until he figured this out. He pushed from the wall, spun on his heel, ripped the door open, and walked away without uttering a word. Dean, wait, he wasn't giving up on Sam. He definitely wasn't. But this hit a bit too close to home, and now he just needed a bit of time to think about it, to clear his head, to get his bearings. Dean. The Impala peeled out with a spray of dirt and gravel, leaving Sam behind alone in the yard. He did what? Castiel winced at the furious voice of his superior, but he still repeated what he just reported. Dean Winchester aired to understand his mission and. I heard you the first time. Zachariah cut him off, abruptly standing up from his chair. They were in the penthouse of a skyscraper that Zachariah took for his own usage together with his vessel. It sort of became the headquarters for all the angels deployed on Earth. Or, at least, the place where they reported to their superior and received further orders. Castiel watched the elegantly suited figure starting to pace the room with barely concealed rage bubbling just below the manner of cool sophistication, the High Seraph's 2 pairs of grey wings raised and feathers ruffled in his great ire. That imbecilic hairless ape, Zachariah yelled as he prowled back and forth along his work table. That's what happens when ignorant soldiers like you make decisions on their own. No one told you to cleanse the soul of the righteous man, now, do they? He paused to glare at the other angel, lips curled slightly into a sneer. Castiel's bronze-colored wings pressed closer to his back. No, sir, he replied, making sure to keep his tone low and submissive. Zachariah threw his arms up in frustration. Just how stupid can you be? Just how stupid can that human be? If Michael didn't need him, he stopped talking and took a deep breath, reining his emotions in. His wings slowly returned to their relaxed position as he forced himself to calm down. No matter, he said, smoothing down the imaginary creases in his expensive suit. There are other ways to make him do what we need him to do. A smile broke across his vessel's face, splitting his skin into something wicked. Zachariah sat down in his chair again and looked up at Castiel, scowling as if surprised that the young angel was still there. I thought you had seals to protect. Castiel dipped his head in respect, immediately departing and landing neatly right into the empty passenger's seat in Dean's car. He kept himself hidden this time, invisible to the human's eye. Slightly tilting his head to the side, he stared at the man. He still had a hard time identifying human expressions, but even he could see that Dean looked incredibly sad at the moment. Castiel didn't know why he felt the sudden compulsion to comfort this human, but his 2 left wings arched around Dean like it was the most natural thing to do. It was strange. From the moment he cradled the broken soul of the righteous man and the latter held onto him with extreme desperation, he realized that he wanted to protect Dean. To love and cherish him, just like his father once told them to do. Dean's soul was nothing like he had expected a human soul to be. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, but all the taint and corruption threatened to extinguish its light. He couldn't let it happen. Instead, he wanted to see it thrive and shine in all its brilliance. Taking the sinner's taint into himself, cleansing the soul of the righteous man was an impulsive decision, a whim. He got punished for his actions, yet Castiel couldn't muster a single drop of regret. He would do it again if he had a choice. Gradually, Dean relaxed under the comfort of his wings, some of that profound sadness flitted away into peacefulness. Castiel preened, chest swelling at the accomplishment. Zachariah's words came to his mind. What would Michael need Dean for? Yes, he was the one who could stop the apocalypse, being the one who started it, but Castiel somehow doubted that this was the reason. Could Dean be Michael's true vessel? That thought startled the young seraph, and he squinted at the human, scrutinizing his profile with extreme intensity. It would explain why he felt so strange around him. Archangel's vessels were special by themselves, and with such a strong and vibrant soul like Dean's, no wonder Castiel felt such a great presence in the righteous man. The first Archangel, the oldest of all creation, was revered by all the angels, his strength and beauty known throughout heaven, and his name was always spoken with a mixture of reverence and adoration. Though Castiel had never met his eldest brother face to face, he had glimpsed him from afar, and even at a distance, the sheer aura of his presence had filled him with awe. At that one brief moment in the motel room, it seemed as if Michael himself stared him down. Dean's presence was many times weaker, but nonetheless similarly magnificent and demanding respect. The distress call from the team engaging Lucifer's followers for the seal caught Castiel off guard. With a last glance at Dean, he moved his wings away from the man and took off to help his siblings. Dean shivered out of nowhere as if someone removed the warm and comforting blanket from around his shoulders. He looked around the car, baffled, then shrugged, pushing it out of his mind. Leaning towards the glove compartment, he pulled out his cassette collection and picked one of Led Zeppelin's tapes. The road ahead to the possible location of his grace piece was too long for Dean to wallow in his own thoughts, so as the music filled the air, he let it wash all of it away. Sitting at the table near the window in their motel room, Sam tried to take his mind off the early morning events by reading a random lore book. Only after skimming the same paragraph for the 5th time, he realized that it didn't help at all. With a sneer, he shoved the book away from himself and it flew off the table and into the opposite wall. Sam heaved a heavy sigh as he scrubbed his face with his hands, then glanced at his phone, zeroing in on the time. Past midday already. Dean still wasn't back. Sam couldn't get the last sight of his face out of his head. He didn't look furious to the point where Sam imagined he would have wanted to punch him. He didn't look infuriated at all. Not even slightly. No, it went beyond just his appearance. Dean wasn't angry back then, Sam could tell. All he had seen on his brother's face was sadness. So overwhelming, Sam almost tasted it in the air, so thick and cloying it felt like he could choke on it. And it unsettled him more than any other reaction ever could. He simply never expected it. He could deal with anger, could deal with disappointment, hurt, and even betrayal, but this kind of sadness. No one prepared him to deal with that. God, he screwed up, didn't he? Screwed up so badly. Sam jumped when his phone rang. Quickly grabbing it, he pressed the answer button without even looking at the caller ID. Dean, was his immediate question as he brought the phone to his ear. No, Sam, it's Travis. Remember me? Used to hunt with John back in the day. Oh, Sam couldn't even pretend that he wasn't disappointed. Hey, Travis. Sorry to disappoint, kid, but it's good to hear your voice. It's good to hear your voice too, Travis. He paused, mind working a mile a minute. Dean might be calling him, so he didn't want to keep exchanging pleasantries and keep his phone busy. Look, it's not really a good time right now. Besides, Dean's not here. I gathered. I thought I heard you two have been hunting together lately. Did he skip town to work a case on his own? Sam's jaw tightened. Travis was an old family friend, but they hadn't heard from him in probably a decade. He had no right to know what happened between the two brothers. Yeah, something like that, so it's not the best timing right now. Well, I'm not calling you just to say hi. I broke my arm, some nasty ghost, and now I need help with a case. It's a time-sensitive one, so it can't wait until I get better. Sam pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a soft sigh. He didn't want to deal with this. Nothing hard, it'll be quick and simple, I promise. Help this old man once, huh? For old time's sake. But sitting here and waiting for Dean was driving him insane. Maybe a case could work as a distraction. Yeah, okay, Sam murmured, straightening up and reaching for a pen and a piece of paper. Just, give me the details. Carthage, Missouri. Look for Jack Montgomery. Keep an eye out for anything weird. Sam frowned. Anything weird? What did he mean by anything weird? I'll meet you there as soon as I arrive. Okay, see you there. Sam ended the call, but stayed seated for a few minutes. Clicking his tongue at his hesitancy, he dialed Dean's number once again. His heartbeat picked up as he waited, but once again, there was no answer and he left a quick message on Dean's voicemail about going to Carthage, Missouri to help Travis out with a case. He called Bobby next. Hello. Hey, Bobby, is Dean at your place? No, the old man sounded genuinely confused. Dean wasn't with him then. I thought ya boys were hunting together. Yeah, we are, just, Sam trailed off, chewing on his lower lip as Dean's expression of overwhelming sadness came to the forefront of his mind again. Did he call you? Said anything? No, Bobby replied, a bit more sternly now. Sam, what happened? He left very early in the morning and I haven't heard from him since. What do you mean by Dean left? We had a disagreement and now he's neither picking up his phone nor coming back to the motel. Disagreement? What kind of disagreement? It's nothing, Bobby, don't worry about it. Sam winced at his own words. He probably just made him worry with this call. But it seems that Dean's really pissed about it. I don't know where he went. Bobby groaned, and Sam could imagine him rubbing his face in frustration. What's up with you two? You let another trickster come in between you. Despite this whole shitty situation and festering guilt, Sam's lips twitched up. No, God, no, thankfully, we haven't met any tricksters since the last one, he replied. His mirth died as soon as it appeared. Just, let me know if he ends up at your place or calls you or anything, okay? There was a slight pause, just long enough for anxiety to tighten its grip on Sam's heart. Sure thing, Sam," Bobby finally replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "But give me a heads up if Dean returns, so I can stop worrying about you idiots." "Okay, and keep yourself out of trouble, would ya?" The gruff concern in Bobby's tone was almost enough to break the dam holding back Sam's bottled-up emotions, and for reasons he couldn't quite pinpoint, his eyes began to sting. His "thanks, Bobby" came out a bit choked, the words catching in his throat. Thankfully, Bobby didn't mention it, either not noticing it or out of understanding. After ending the call, Sam sniffed and took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. He kept telling himself that everything was fine. He was fine. Dean was fine. He would find a way to make everything right, no matter what it took. He just didn't know how yet, but he had to believe he could do it. Somehow, some way, he would fix this. He had to, even if it meant abandoning the path he was on now, even if it meant giving up what he thought was the right thing to do. He would do it because the alternative was unthinkable. He wouldn't be losing his brother. Not again, not when he barely survived losing him the first time. Dean climbed out of the Impala, eyes sliding over all the luxury cars parked in the parking lot before settling on the grand estate in front of him. People in expensive-looking clothes were milling around on the terrace with waiters darting around them, carrying trays with champagne and light snacks. Inevitably, Dean's gaze shifted toward the second floor of the estate. He started to feel it from miles away already, but standing here, only a few feet away, he couldn't stop his excitement rising. The piece of his grace was truly here. It buzzed and pulsated, so eager to reunite with its owner. It reached out, resonating with the grace inside Dean and making it twirl and surge out. He clamped down on all the excitement and forced himself to calm down. Soon he would get another piece of his true essence and be one step closer to becoming whole again. Of course, he could call that piece in the estate from the distance and it would come to him. He wasn't as powerless as he was before he gained the first one, but people would see it. The grace by itself wasn't dangerous to their physical well-being, but it would cause chaos and panic, and Dean couldn't let it happen. Not when he had angels and demons running around, searching for the edge against each other. It would be disastrous if either side learned about his existence. The Archangel Michael inside flesh and blood, with clipped wings and barely a shadow of his true powers. He would only be a piece of juicy meat on the market for the hungry crowd. Better be careful and patient. Dean rubbed his chest when it ached with the phantom feeling of emptiness. Not as strong as it had been when he had no grace at all, but it made him equally uncomfortable and feeling hollow. With an irritated grunt, Dean pried his hand from his chest, fixed his tie, and walked toward the entrance. He left his usual duffel bag back in the motel with Sam, but at least he had his formal wear in Baby's trunk and this auction seemed exactly like a perfect event to use it. However, a step away from the entrance, a burly man with a sour look on his face blocked Dean's way in. "Invitation, please," the man grumbled, suspiciously eyeing him up and down. Dean plastered his best businessman's smile and smothered the urge to punch him. "I'm a +1 and my lady is already inside, waiting for me," he lied smoothly. The guard snorted, puffing his chest like a peacock readying itself for a fight. "No invitation, no entry. Look, pal, you really don't want to get on her bad side by stopping me here," Dean insisted, then leaned closer, lowered his voice, and muttered, "She gets irritated when I'm not around." "Look, pal," the man spat the word out like it was a curse. "No invitation," he made a dramatic pause, "no entry." That was damn rude, Dean thought. He looked around. In the garden on his left beside the couple busy behind the trees, there was no one else there. The parking lot behind him was empty. Lastly, if he angled it correctly, no one from the terrace on the right would see a thing. He turned back to the guard with a sigh, balling his hand into a fist. "I didn't want to do this, but I'm in a hurry, so." Dean stiffened hearing his own name. A woman in a black gown emerged from inside, favoring him with a big, friendly smile. "I thought I heard your voice," she said. "It's been a while." It took Dean a moment, but eventually, he recalled who she was. The young woman who had a thing for Sam and he for her in that haunted painting case years ago. "Sarah," he said, relaxing his posture. "Long time no see." Sarah's smile widened, clearly happy about him remembering her. "He's with me, Julian," she told the guard. Noticing his less than pleasant expression, she raised an eyebrow. "Unless it's somehow a problem. Do I have to inform Mr. Hanover about this?" The man sucked in a breath. No, Miss Blake," he quickly denied. "This gentleman can enter, of course, there is no problem." Before he could even finish, Dean was already moving forward. He paused when he passed by the guard and smirked at him. "I told you my lady is inside," chuckles, he said, voice tilting in a clear mockery, "and that she's impatient." The guard's lip curled up into a sneer, but he couldn't insult a legit guest, so he stayed silent. Dean winked at him as the last jab and strode inside. "You came just in time, thanks," he said to Sarah waiting for him. "I don't know what crawled up his ass, but it's nothing good for sure." Sarah let out a short laugh. "It seemed like you were ready to punch him, so I had to intervene." "I was ready to punch him," Dean admitted with a nonchalant shrug. "Then it's lucky that I heard you." Sarah shook her head, amused, stepped closer to loop her arm through his, and started leading him towards the stairs. "I hope Sam's doing fine as well." "Yeah, he's fine." If Sarah noticed his slight hesitation in wording, she didn't say anything. "We're, working on different cases this time, so me is all you have, sorry." "It's good to see you, Dean." "Unexpected, but good," Sarah assured, then hesitated. "Don't get me wrong when I ask you, but should I be concerned about seeing you here?" "Nah," Dean dismissed her worries with a little wave of his hand. "This time it's not anything dangerous. This thing, it would never hurt anyone." Sarah hummed under her breath, dipping her head and smiling at the older man as the two of them passed him on their way to the second floor. "Actually, I came here after hearing all these stories about this. It's not every day you have a chance to see a painting that is known to perform miracles. And after our adventures last time, I figured I should at least see it once." They climbed the stairs as they talked, and Sarah pointed at one of the rooms in the middle of the hallway. "It's in there." They stopped as soon as they entered the room. Sunlight poured through high windows, decorated with antique luxury curtains, and created a warm and soothing atmosphere in the spacious, empty room. And in the middle of it stood a single easel with the painting. It depicted a dramatic scene of the Archangel Michael dressed in armor with his wings flaring behind him and holding a sword that was poised to strike the defeated devil and throw him out of heaven and into hell. Swirling clouds filled the background with light and shadows, casting Michael in a divine light while Lucifer's twisted form was left engulfed in darkness. Dean's previous excitement suddenly wilted and died. He knew that humans exaggerated Lucifer's bad traits in their art, because, well, no one wanted to see the devil beautiful and charming like he was in reality. No, they warped and perverted his image just like Lucifer did when he turned human souls into demons. How ironic. Maybe it was a glimmer of poetic justice. Mr. Hanover holds this painting in very high regard. He paid a hefty price to import it from Europe, Sarah said, pulling her arm away from Dean's and walking closer to the easel with the canvas, carefully looking over it. The work of an unknown artist, depicting the Archangel Michael vanquishing the devil, the scene from the Book of Revelation that was popular during the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. It was found in an abandoned Romanian abbey's storeroom and put on display in the local church. People say that if you pray to the Archangel Michael in the proximity of this painting, you can get healed of your ailments. She turned back to Dean, curious. "With things that you see on your job, do you believe in miracles?" "Miracles? No, I don't," Dean replied as he also approached the painting. "The healing of this painting is not a miracle, it's a side effect." Sarah knitted her brow. "I don't think I understand your words fully, but are you saying that the healing part is true?" "Yeah," Dean muttered as he lifted his hand to gently touch the painting's surface. "It has a piece of Michael's powers embedded into it, so, of course, it'll respond to someone praying to its owner." He could feel his grace reaching out, impatient and yearning. Some of its golden glow breached the surface and shone underneath his finger. "Do you believe in angels, Sarah?" Sarah eyed the glow suspiciously, but seeing Dean not reacting to it, chose not to comment on it, probably trusting him to know what he was doing. "If you'd asked me before you and Sam proved that ghosts exist with that murder ghost business last time, I'd have said no, but now, I guess I wouldn't be so against it." Dean traced the figure of Lucifer in the painting, letting the light of his grace illuminate it. "Humans portray Lucifer as this ugly, twisted creature, but did you know that he used to be the most beautiful angel in heaven? He was loved and admired by every angel, even more so than Michael." Lucifer in the painting, cast in shadows and twisted beyond recognition, was a far cry from the radiant being he truly was. Contrary to the angels who followed him out of heaven and were left to rot in hell or earth, the cage protected him from the corruption that tainted the others. His form, though feared and despised now, remained unblemished by time or decay. The irony wasn't lost on Dean. Lucifer, the most reviled of them all, was still the most perfect in appearance, preserved in his divine glory by the very prison meant to punish him. But he got locked up there all alone for eternity with no hope for forgiveness or reprieve. No one, not even Lucifer, deserved that. Do you think he deserves redemption? Dean asked, his voice quiet, barely above the whisper. Sarah's eyes followed his hand gliding across the painting's surface, leaving traces of soft golden glow behind. I'm not sure about the devil, she started with careful hesitance, clearly feeling out of her depth, but I at least believe that every person has some good in them, and those who stray away, with the right guidance, can sometimes find their way back. Right guidance, Dean echoed. The words rolled off his tongue as a possibility he hadn't fully considered until now. He wanted to stop the apocalypse, no doubt. Sam, Bobby, and the others lived in this world and wanted to save it. Dean didn't wish to see it destroyed either. Besides, Sammy deserved the best life he could have, free from the chains of destiny that had bound him for so long, and Dean would make sure to break them, one way or another. And if he succeeded, if he managed to stop the apocalypse, Dean could find Father and beg him to forgive Lucifer, to set him free without destroying the earth, to take him back, to talk with him. And if that wasn't possible, maybe to allow him to take Lucifer's place, or at least accompany him in the cage. He wasn't quite sure just yet how exactly he would convince Father or what even he would say to him, but one thing he knew for sure, he refused to leave Lucifer alone in the cage any longer. But if Sam couldn't resist the darkness within him, couldn't fight against the gears of destiny that were in full motion already, and Dean failed to stop the apocalypse, he would refuse to fight Lucifer. He wouldn't be following the orders Father left for him. Not this time, not again. How he would stop his brother, he didn't know yet, but he would think of something. He wouldn't let Lucifer take Sam either, his true vessel or not. Right guidance, Dean repeated, the words taking on a new weight as they settled in his mind. He wasn't sure if he was the right person to take on the role of a guide in this scenario, but he also believed that Lucifer wasn't beyond saving, even after all that he had done, and all the pain he had caused. If there was a chance, even a slim one, to change the course of things, to steer his brother away from his path of destruction, then maybe, just maybe, Dean would succeed. Lucifer didn't have to be the monster everyone thought he was. This wasn't just about stopping the end of the world. It was about redemption, not just for Lucifer, but maybe for Dean, for Michael, too. Even if he didn't feel like he deserved one. Regardless, it was about time he stopped running away like a coward. The grace inside Dean blossomed out like a slowly rising sun. The piece in the painting resonated with it, shining brighter and brighter until Dean covered it with his palm to avoid illuminating an entire room. Dean, Sarah called out as she backed off. Whatever you're doing, it's starting to scare me. It's all right, Sarah, no harm will come to you, trust me, Dean said as he turned to her with a small smile. Close your eyes for a moment. He waited until she shut her eyes before coaxing the piece of his grace out of the painting. It surged out, showering the room in a divine aureate light for a split second, and then immediately rushed toward him. Instinctively, Dean gripped the edge of the painting's frame when already familiar scorching pain seared through his every vein like liquid fire. But this time, it was bearable and lasted much shorter. A minute, maybe two, and he straightened up, rolling his shoulders. The pieces of his grace merged without any complications, settling back in the usual spot next to his soul. A luxurious chandelier above lit up and then all but exploded, raining tiny shards of glass on their heads. His green eyes glowing almost fully golden, Dean waved a hand and swiped the debris away from Sarah and himself. He felt good, better than he could ever remember. He missed the feeling of his powers coursing through his very being and having them at his fingertips. No wings yet, but he was so much stronger now. Next time he would see Ruby, Dean would make that skunk feel pain. A second set of whispers appeared at the corner of his mind too. It had been so long since Dean heard it, it took him a moment to realize what it was, prayers. The second piece of his grace gave him back the ability to hear human prayers that they sent to the Archangel Michael. Is it finished? Sarah stammered out where she stood with her hands over her eyes. Can I open my eyes now? Dean let his grace retreat into its hiding spot, molten gold fading from his eyes as it did so. Yeah, it's done, it's safe now. Blinking, Sarah looked around, gasping at the broken glass in a circle around them. What happened? Dean also glanced at all the rubble. A sheepish smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, sorry, my bad. He could fix it, he had enough juice now, but it seemed it was too late for that, because people were starting to crowd the entry door. I need to go, Sarah, Sam's waiting for me. Thanks for everything, he said as he approached the woman and placed a goodbye kiss on her cheek. Still standing close to her, he whispered, if you ever need help, try praying to the Archangel Michael. He flashed a cheeky grin at her confused gaze. Who knows, he might hear you even not in close proximity to this painting. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but immediately closed it. Okay, was the only thing she finally uttered. Bye, Dean, no offense, but I hope to never see you again. Dean laughed. He didn't take any offense and only hoped that she wouldn't get into a situation where she would need to pray to him either. Bye, Sarah. Get out. Sam learned how to read other people early in life. It was a skill born out of necessity of their circumstances, but it was a valuable asset in the line of work they did. So he could clearly see that this man in front of him, Jack Montgomery, a potential Ruguro, while looking furious, he also felt terrified. He could relate. Sometimes, he didn't want to admit it, but sometimes he also felt terrified. What he wouldn't give for that to not be true, but just like Jack, he had this disease pumping through his veins and no matter how hard he wished that it was gone, that it was out of him, it wasn't going to happen. He had to live with it, control it somehow, and try to use it to save people instead of making something good come out of it. That was the only option he had left. Dean never understood that. If Jack could resist, it would be proof. Proof that neither Jack nor Sam had to be monsters, that they were more than just the curse that plagued them. Proof that they had a choice, that they were worthy of salvation. But first, Sam had to convince this man to listen to him. Jack, get out now, or I'm gonna call the police. Sam wanted to grab this stubborn man by his shirt's lapels and shake him until he understood, but he set his jaw and didn't say anything else. As he turned to leave, he could only hope that Jack would eventually change his mind and would keep himself in check now that he knew about his Ruguro genes. Sliding in the driver's seat of the rented car he was using, Sam checked his phone. No missed calls or messages. Neither from Dean nor from Bobby. With a sigh, he rested his forehead on the steering wheel. Nothing was going his way recently. Dean was who knew where, Jack Montgomery refused to listen to him, and Travis was adamant about killing the monster that didn't exist yet. Would he also turn into a monster if he continued this road he had chosen? Turn into something they hunted? He wished to prove that he wouldn't, that he knew what he was doing, and what he was getting into. But did he really? The shard tower Dean made on the coffee table that day suddenly came to his mind. Sam frowned. And that, Sammy, is how demons are made. Completely broken, twisted, and barely resembling the soul that they once were, that was how Dean described demons. But Ruby was different, right? She was a demon, sure, but she came to him when he needed someone the most, took care of him in Dean's stead, and taught him so much about his abilities. She never asked anything of him. The only thing she insisted strongly on was killing Lilith, but it aligned with Sam's goals too. She wasn't like the other demons. His phone rang. Sam jolted from his thoughts. Grabbing his phone, he glanced down at the caller ID. His eyes widened upon seeing the name and he fumbled with his phone in his rush to answer it. Dean. Heya, Sammy. Sam's heart thumped at the use of the affectionate version of his name. Dean, listen, I can explain, okay. He sounded so desperate even for his own ears, but at this moment he didn't care. He tasted hope for once and he wasn't about to let it go. He wanted his brother back. So, please, just listen to me. Well, first, Dean paused to clear his throat, I'm sorry that I left without a word. I had to clear my head, gather my thoughts. What I saw back there scared me, Sam. He expected something like this, prepared to hear it during these few last days without any contact from Dean. Honestly, he thought it would be worse, much worse, and while he didn't know if he could have survived his brother saying that he hated him now, even this small admission made his stomach twist itself into knots. Sam tried to force words out past his throat, but they caught like hooks. Pinching the bridge of his nose, he took a moment to collect himself. I'm sorry, Dean, let me explain, please. I'll listen. In return, can you also listen to me? Don't shut me down just because you think that I can't understand what you're going through. Do we have a deal? Sam could feel the weight being lifted from his shoulders, chest welling with relief. Yeah, he breathed out, letting his head drop against the driver's seat. It was only fair that they listen to each other. Dean, it's a deal. Great, Sammy, it's a good start. His brother sounded so enthusiastic, even Sam smiled at that. But this isn't a phone talk, so where are you at right now? Still in Minnesota, I'll come pick you up. No, I'm in Carthage, Missouri, Sam replied. Dean must have called him without listening to his voicemail first. Travis, remember Travis, the old hunting friend of Dad's? He called me and asked for help with a case. Said it's time sensitive and he broke his arm in a previous case, so I came to help. Travis, the Impala's engine revved in the background of the call. Dean didn't waste any second to start driving. Yeah, I remember him. What kinda case? Ruguro. Why does it sound so made up? A pause. Wait, is that the thing that turns into a monster after eating human flesh for the first time? Yeah, but what? The guy's still human, Dean, he hasn't turned yet. Sam unconsciously tensed, steeling himself for the possible outburst. So I tried talking with him. And, Dean urged when Sam didn't say anything more. How did it go? Sam thought his brother would immediately call him an idiot for wasting time, for trying to reason with a monster, but then, he didn't. It was so unexpected, he felt speechless. Sam, did something happen while you were talking with the guy? Did he, I don't know, flip out or something? No, Sam trailed off. I just thought you'd be against talking with him and be all gank first, ask questions later. Like Travis. There was silence on the other end of the call. It wrapped around Sam, tense and suffocating, and he regretted saying those words now. Didn't you say he's still human? Dean wondered. Not angry or annoyed, he sounded merely confused. If he never ends up munching on some Manburger helper, he should stay human. Sam opened his mouth, then closed it. Not like his brother never agreed with him, but he couldn't help but get a little excited at his support this time. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, so I talked with the guy, and, his shoulder dropped in resignation, it didn't go well. The guy's totally in denial. Dean hummed on the other side. Sam could hear stray music notes coming from the radio and Impala's engine rumbling as he sped up. I'm on my way to Missouri, should be there in the evening probably. We'll figure it out when I arrive, alright, he said. So, sit tight, Sammy, and don't do anything dangerous. Sam's chest warmed at the brotherly concern he could hear in Dean's voice. At the same time, his vision blurred, so he shut his eyes and pressed his fingers over them, forcing back unexpected tears. Yeah, okay, Dean, he muttered, pushing down his emotion and trying to sound natural. Call me once you're in the city. Will do. The call ended. Sam slumped against the seat again, staring at the car's roof. This went well. Dean was more understanding than he could have ever hoped him to be. His brother extended his trust to him, even after finding out he lied, and so Sam was ready to tell him everything about Ruby and what happened after his death. He straightened up. Well, almost everything. Some things he would still keep a secret. No matter how understanding Dean had become recently, he would not understand this. Sam could live with others calling him a freak, an abomination, a monster, but hearing those words from his brother, it would destroy him. So, he would lock that part of his past away to never be seen or talked about. He was done with that anyway, regardless of how displeased Ruby would be once she heard about it. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If there's anything you think could be improved or if something didn't sit right with you, please let us know in the comments. Your feedback is invaluable to us as we strive to create the best content possible. We'd love to hear your ideas and opinions. As new content creators, we rely on our audience's insights to shape our future videos. So don't hold back, share your thoughts below.